Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Rachel Spencer. I'm 28 years old, and this happened in November 2023. I remember the exact date we left for Seneca Rocks because it was supposed to be a cozy weekend getaway with my boyfriend, Lucas Whitaker, a 31-year-old history teacher. I'd planned it for over a month, carefully picking the perfect remote lodge in the Monongahela National Forest. My idea was to capture the crisp autumn views for my travel blog and to spend time with Lucas away from the stress of our daily routines. It turned out to be the worst decision of my life. We arrived at a rundown property the locals simply called Whispering Pines Lodge. Driving into that small mountain town felt like entering another world. A tangle of narrow roads and centuries-old storefronts, half of which were boarded up, guided us deeper into the forest. Even the sunlight seemed muted beneath the heavy canopy of pines and skeletal hardwoods. When we first pulled up to the lodge, the sign was missing a few letters, so it read as Hesperi Jipa A's. The building itself looked imposing. 2 stories, weathered wood, shutters hanging on by a single hinge here and there. It was evening, the sky already flushing that pinkish orange of late fall, and I remember thinking how the building looked like a silhouette leaning forward, eaves drooping, dark windows gazing at us like empty eyes. Lucas got out of the car and stretched. He was excited. He'd read about the region's Civil War history and local legends, though he usually dismissed anything too paranormal. Still, he loved the feel of old places, calling them living textbooks. As I grabbed my camera to snap photos, I noticed the caretaker standing on the porch. He appeared almost out of nowhere. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a moth-eaten flannel coat. He had a gaunt face, cheekbones sharp against wrinkled skin, and pale eyes that refused to meet mine. The name he gave us was Harlan. He didn't offer a last name and he didn't smile. "Long drive?" he asked in a rasping voice. I nodded, feeling uncomfortably aware of the sudden drop in temperature. I clung to my camera, uncertain whether to ask the questions swirling in my mind. Why was the lodge so empty? Was it really open for guests? But I'd already paid a deposit online, though that transaction now seemed suspiciously lacking in detail. Harlan gestured for us to follow him inside. The front door led into a small foyer with a musty couch and a single lamp. An unlit fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel thick with dust and cobwebs. The floorboards creaked underfoot. It smelled like damp wood and something older, something that reminded me of rotting leaves or decaying grass. "You'll be in the main suite upstairs," Harlan said abruptly. "There's a key on the table. Don't lose it." Lucas asked about the heat, the hot water, standard things. Harlan's only response was, "Stay on the path if you leave at night." He fixed Lucas with a cold stare. "Don't wander too far. Nothing good comes of it." At that moment, a gust of wind blew through the foyer, flickering the lamp's light and making the door slam shut behind us. I swear the old caretaker smiled for half a second, then turned and walked deeper into the house without saying another word. I tried to brush off the bad vibe. It was just an old lodge, after all, in a remote corner of West Virginia. The atmosphere was bound to be creepy, and I'm a blogger who thrives on weird, out-of-the-way places. So I took Lucas's hand, and we went upstairs to see the suite. Our room was large, with a high ceiling that angled beneath the roof. A single window overlooked the dark forest beyond. The bed was an antique 4-poster with a threadbare comforter. A rickety dresser stood in the corner. There was a little nightstand next to the bed, holding an old clock that read 8:09, even though my watch said 7:45. At the time, I thought the clock was just broken or poorly set, so I ignored it. Our phones were nearly dead, which was strange because both were fully charged when we started the drive just a few hours prior. But we chalked it up to the GPS draining the battery. Lucas pulled out a charging cable, but the only outlet in the room was an ancient two-prong that didn't fit our adapters. There was no Wi-Fi, and the cell reception was practically non-existent. Not great for a travel blogger, but again, I tried to see it as part of the rustic charm. We returned downstairs, hoping to ask Harlan about a more modern outlet. We found him near the fireplace, fiddling with logs and tinder. I noticed that the windows on this floor had thick boards nailed over them from the outside. Why would you board up your own windows? "Any chance we can charge our phones?" Lucas asked. Harlan shook his head. "Power's unreliable. Best you forget about those. Nobody gets signal here anyway." He leaned toward the unlit fireplace. "I'll get this started for warmth. Storm's coming." I thanked him. He didn't respond. Instead, he lit a match and touched it to the logs. The fire roared to life faster than I expected, like the wood was soaked in lighter fluid. The flames flickered in shades of normal orange, but occasionally a sickly green hue danced along the edges. I assumed it was a trick of the light or some kind of chemical reaction from old wood. It made me uneasy anyway. We brought in our luggage, but during the shuffle I noticed something odd. My toothbrush was damp, bristles slightly frayed. I'd bought a new one specifically for the trip, and I knew I hadn't used it yet. I also found one of my old sweaters in Lucas's suitcase. A sweater I was sure I'd left at home because it had a tear in the sleeve. It was neatly folded on top of his clothes. I asked him if he packed it by mistake, but he looked just as confused as I felt. "It's not a big deal," I said, trying to push away the goosebumps forming on my arms. "We can just toss it aside." Lucas gave me a half smile. "Maybe your mind's on overdrive. Relax. It's going to be a fun weekend." We spent the rest of the evening trying to get comfortable. Harlan vanished, presumably to his own quarters. We found a small kitchen area with a working stove, though it sputtered and smelled faintly of gas. I made instant coffee and some canned soup. The swirling shadows cast by the fireplace made me antsy. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Upstairs, I noticed a deep, biting cold, even though the fire was roaring downstairs. The thermostat on the wall flickered between 68 and 55 degrees in a matter of seconds, as if it couldn't decide. My travel blogger curiosity was piqued, but a deeper primal fear rattled me. Something about this place felt wrong. The best I can explain it is an electric tension in the air, the sense that the walls were breathing around me, waiting for me to fall asleep. Lucas and I tried to settle under thick blankets. He drifted off quickly. He'd always been able to sleep anywhere. I, however, lay awake, listening to the wind. It seemed to moan through the trees, whistling in the eaves. At around what my watch said was 2 a.m., I began to doze. The last thing I remembered before slipping into uneasy sleep was a faint voice. It was so soft I couldn't make out the words, just a rhythmic whisper that seemed to come from the corners of the room. I woke up to Lucas shaking me. Pale light filtered through the window. My watch claimed it was 7:03 a.m., but the old clock on the nightstand blinked 4:16. Oddly enough, the hour hand was spinning in slow circles, seemingly disconnected from time. "Babe, did you open the door last night?" Lucas asked, tone edgy. "What?" I rubbed my eyes. "No, why?" "It was unlocked this morning," he said, pointing to the bedroom door. "And I could have sworn we locked it." He paused, his voice growing softer. "It wasn't just unlocked, it was cracked open." A chill coursed through me. I tried to bury it beneath rational thinking. Maybe we forgot. Maybe Harlan came in for some reason. Lucas proposed that, but it made no sense for the caretaker to come in silently, do nothing, and leave. Feeling uneasy, we decided to go downstairs to find Harlan and ask him about it. We found no sign of the caretaker. A note pinned to the mantel read, "Gone to town, be back evening. Don't go outside at night." That was it. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Lucas was getting restless, so we decided to do a short hike on the nearby trail. The caretaker's warning about not going out at night was bizarre, but we were heading out in daylight, so it felt safe enough. On our way out, we checked our phones. Mine was dead. Lucas's phone also showed a black screen. Without a map, we relied on a partially memorized route from a brochure I'd found in the kitchen drawer. The lodge was allegedly just a mile or two from the official Seneca Rocks trails, or so the brochure claimed. We started walking, inhaling the crisp mountain air. Initially, it felt pleasant. Dense woods, golden leaves carpeting the ground. The forest, however, was eerily quiet, almost devoid of bird calls or scurrying animals. Our footsteps sounded muffled. The trees felt like looming giants, their bark twisted in patterns that sometimes looked like faces. After a half hour, we reached a clearing with a sign hammered into the earth. Faded letters read, "Stay on the path." A narrow dirt trail curved deeper into the woods. We followed it, confident it would lead us to some scenic view. But something was off. As we walked, I got the sense the landscape was shifting. The trail would seem to veer east, but after a few steps, I'd glance at the compass on my watch, and it indicated we were walking west. Lucas and I tried to keep calm, but the deeper we went, the more it felt like the forest was folding in on itself. We eventually turned around, deciding to retrace our steps. That was when we noticed footprints in the mud that matched our own shoe treads. But they were facing the opposite direction, as if we'd already come back. Even Lucas, the skeptic, started muttering that this was crazy. "Don't panic," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in my own ears. "Let's just head back to the lodge. We'll wait for Harlan or find a ride into the main town, get real directions." It took longer than it should have, but we managed to loop back to the clearing with the sign. Then we continued the way we'd come. After another half hour, we arrived at the lodge again, though from a different angle. It loomed from behind dense evergreens, and I swore it hadn't been that close to the tree line before. Inside, the lodge was freezing. I tried the fireplace again, rummaging for matches. The moment I struck one, the flame hissed and burned green. The logs were half burned from the night before, but they felt cold and damp, as if they'd never been lit at all. Lucas was hungry, so we checked the fridge in the kitchen. The sandwich meat we'd brought was coated in a fuzzy white mold that definitely wasn't there last night. The fruit was brown and shriveled. "Did the power go out?" Lucas asked. I shook my head, not sure how to answer. Everything was spoiling far too quickly, as if time were speeding up for our food but standing still for the rest of us. "Okay, let's just keep calm," I said, desperately trying to maintain a steady voice. "We have plenty of canned goods. We can open some of that." While we prepared a quick meal, I noticed that the clock on the microwave blinked 12 o'clock over and over, refusing to reset. When I pressed the buttons, the screen flickered with random numbers. 3:48, 5:12, 2:07, then back to 12 o'clock. Lucas tried to brush it off as faulty wiring. As the evening wore on, I paced around the lodge, snapping photos on my camera. Strangely, the memory card wouldn't register the pictures. Every time I took a photo, the image on the screen was pitch black. Even with the flash, it showed nothing. Lucas suggested the camera was broken, but it worked fine the day before we arrived. We decided to make a fire in the fireplace again, hoping at least the warmth would drive away the unnatural chill. I stacked new logs, lit a fresh match, and the fire sprang to life immediately. It burned that same odd shade of green around the edges. Without Harlan around, we ate more soup and decided to try to sleep early. The storm he'd mentioned seemed to be rolling in, thunder rumbling in the distance. That night, I woke to Lucas gently shaking me again. The old clock said 3:03, the hands spinning, but my watch read 1:15 a.m. He looked shaken. I heard footsteps in the hallway, he whispered. I think Harlan's back. We listened. At first, I heard only the wind, then a definite creak of floorboards. Slow, purposeful steps. They stopped right outside our door. Lucas got up, carefully twisting the lock. We stood there, hearts pounding. A shadow passed beneath the gap. The handle jiggled, but the door didn't open. We stayed still for several minutes until the footsteps receded. Then, faintly, from the other side of the door, we both heard something like a whisper. "She's waiting for you." Lucas mouthed, "What the hell?" at me, and I just shook my head, tears of fear gathering in my eyes. I was tempted to call out to demand who was there, but my instinct screamed that I should keep quiet. Neither of us slept well. We dozed fitfully until dawn. When we finally dared to leave the room, the door was, once again, unlocked. We found muddy footprints in the hallway, but they disappeared halfway down the stairs. The caretaker was nowhere to be seen, but a single note lay on the banister. "She's already chosen him. Best let it happen clean." We stared at each other. "Chosen who?" Lucas whispered, obviously rattled. "Chosen me?" I snatched the note and crumpled it in my fist, anger flaring alongside the terror in my gut. "This has gone too far. We have to leave, now." Lucas agreed. We dragged our things downstairs, only to discover that the front door wouldn't budge. The knobs turned, the locks clicked, but the door felt like it was nailed shut from the outside. Lucas tried to shoulder checking it, but it was as solid as a brick wall. We tried the back door off the kitchen. The handle turned, but the door remained immovable. Even the windows were sealed or boarded up. "Maybe we can break the glass," I suggested, desperation creeping in. We found a heavy iron poker by the fireplace and tried to smash a ground floor window. The moment the poker struck the glass, a deafening clang reverberated, as if we'd struck solid steel. No cracks formed. The window didn't even vibrate. Lucas's face was pale. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly struggling to find a rational explanation. Is this some kind of sick joke? The caretaker locked us in, or are we losing our minds? I didn't know how to answer him. The lodge itself felt like a prison now, twisting reality around us. We tried calling 911 on Lucas's phone, but it wouldn't turn on at all. My phone was just as useless. We rummaged for landlines, but there were none. Only more dusty rooms, each one eerily deserted. That afternoon, we prepared ourselves to try once more to escape. We stuffed some supplies into backpacks. Canned food, a flashlight, any tool we could find. The plan was to climb out a second-story window onto the porch roof, then jump down. Carefully, we went upstairs and forced open our room window. Unlike the downstairs windows, it actually moved. The glass swung outward with a protesting creak. A blast of frigid mountain air hit us. My breath hitched at the sight below. The ground looked warped. The front yard was no longer the same gravel patch we'd parked on. It was thick with tall grass, twisted tree roots, and jagged rocks. I felt disoriented, like the lodge was no longer sitting where it had been the day before. Or maybe it had always been like this, and our minds were playing tricks. But there was no sign of our car. The driveway was gone. The only constant was the forest stretching beyond. dark silhouettes of pines. Lucas let out a slow breath. "We're not that high up," he whispered. "We can make the jump if we're careful." He swung his legs over the windowsill and lowered himself. I held the flashlight. As soon as his feet touched the roof, the shingles crumbled under his weight, sliding away like brittle leaves. He lost his footing and began to slip. I dropped down to my knees, leaning out, trying to grab his arm. It was too late. He fell, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. A terrified scream tore from my throat. Heart pounding, I scrambled back inside and raced downstairs, ignoring the unnatural cold that seemed to intensify with each step. When I got to the front door, it still wouldn't open. In pure panic, I bashed at the boards over the windows. They wouldn't yield. Finally, I sprinted to the back of the lodge, checking every locked window until I found one that could be pried open. It led into a side yard thick with undergrowth. I climbed out and ran around to the front, calling Lucas's name. My voice echoed in the silent forest. I found him sprawled on the damp earth, moaning. He clutched his shoulder, face pale. I helped him stand, my mind racing. Miraculously, he hadn't broken any major bones, but he was in terrible pain. With my support, he limped as we moved towards what should have been the driveway. Except there was no driveway. No sign of the car. The trees were pressed right up to the lodge walls, as if decades of forest growth had happened overnight. The only path visible led into dense woods. Lucas glanced around, blinking like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "We're trapped," he whispered, voice trembling. "This is impossible." I felt tears threaten again, but I fought them back. "We'll go on foot. Seneca Rocks can't be that far. We'll find a ranger station or something." Despite his injured shoulder, Lucas nodded. We pressed forward, stepping into the labyrinth of trees. The deeper we went, the gloomier it got, as though the sun had decided to give up on this patch of land. We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch seemed to skip wildly from 2 p.m. to 6:27 p.m. in minutes, then back again. More than once, I looked back to see the outline of the lodge behind us, even though we'd walked a straight line away from it. Suddenly, we stumbled onto a clearing. My heart lifted. Maybe we'd found the official trail, but it was just a ring of twisted pines encircling a small space of dead grass. In the center stood a stone well, partially collapsed. As we approached, a foul odor made me gag, a mix of decay and stagnant water. Lucas leaned against a tree, grimacing in pain from his shoulder. "Let's just rest a second," he said, voice trembling. "I can't keep going like this." We slid to the ground, exhausted. That's when I noticed something carved into the stones of the well. An image of a tall woman, featureless, except for hollow eyes. Above her was a carved name, Marla. I remembered the note I found. Old Marla, the caretaker's warnings. My stomach twisted into a knot. The wind picked up, swirling leaves around us. In the rustling, I swore I heard a whisper. Chosen. Him. Waiting. Lucas's eyes darted around. He must have heard it too because he staggered to his feet. "We need to move," he said. "I can't stay here." We forced ourselves onward, ignoring fatigue. Eventually, we found what looked like a muddy game trail. It led us in a wide loop, and to our horror, less than half an hour later, we ended up right back at the same clearing, the same collapsed well with the same carved name. A feeling of utter helplessness overwhelmed me. Lucas began to pace, mumbling curses under his breath. I was on the edge of panic. Then, unbelievably, we heard a voice calling from the far side of the clearing. "Hello? Rachel?" It was Harlan, the caretaker. He stood among the trees, his figure half-shadowed, beckoning us. Despite my anger, I felt a rush of relief. We stumbled toward him, but as we drew closer, something in the caretaker's posture felt off. He stood rigidly, not leaning against anything, hands at his sides. I noticed his shoes weren't muddy, despite the terrain. His voice when he spoke was flat. "Come back to the lodge," he said. "You shouldn't have left." I erupted. "What the hell is going on? Why did you lock us in? Where is our car? We need help." Harlan's expression flickered between apathy and something else. Pity, maybe. Lucas is already chosen. No point fighting it now. Lucas lurched forward to grab him, but Harlan stepped back. "You'll see in time," the caretaker said quietly. "She's been waiting for you since the day you were born." Then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the thick pines in seconds. I was about to run after him when Lucas stopped me. "Rachel, don't. He's trying to lure us deeper." We exchanged terrified looks, the forest around us eerily silent again. Eventually, we had no choice but to return to the lodge for shelter. Night was falling, and it brought a biting cold that bit through our jackets. We found our way back to the lodge much faster than we left it, almost as if it pulled us in. Inside, everything was dark, save for a single lamp flickering in the foyer. The boards over the windows seemed more numerous, and the door slammed shut behind us on its own. The fire in the fireplace was out, but the logs glowed faintly with green embers, as if they'd been burning all day without heat or light. I managed to find a medical kit in a supply closet, so I bandaged Lucas's shoulder as best I could. He winced, but tried to stay strong for me. The caretaker was still nowhere to be seen. I decided to confront him the moment he showed his face. I wanted answers. We ate a small dinner from the canned goods, which were thankfully still intact. Then we huddled in the living area, the only space with a working lamp, and debated what to do. Lucas argued for another attempt at daylight escape. I told him I agreed, but we needed to rest first. My legs were like jelly from hiking in circles all day. That night, sleep evaded me completely. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw that carved figure of Marla, tall and hollow-eyed. I heard her whispering in the wind, the voice at the door, the caretaker's cryptic words. My mind was a whirlpool of dread. Sometime around midnight, I felt Lucas shift beside me. He rose from the couch where we'd huddled under blankets. I opened my eyes and saw him walking toward the door. "Lucas?" I called softly. He didn't turn. He just kept walking, bare feet padding across the cold floor. I jumped up to follow him. As I reached out to touch his shoulder, he spun around, eyes wide and confused, like he'd just woken from a trance. "What?" he said, disoriented. "Rachel, why are you following me?" I'm following you because you got up," I stammered, heart pounding. He frowned. "I don't remember getting up." That was when a faint rattling noise came from the kitchen. We both froze. Holding my breath, I flicked on the flashlight and shone it toward the corridor leading to the kitchen. Nothing. Just a door swaying on its hinges. We exchanged worried looks. Lucas mouthed, "We should check." Arming ourselves with the iron poker and a heavy candlestick, we crept down the hall. The kitchen was empty except for the gloom. The back door, the one that had been locked, stood ajar, letting in a chill wind. A fresh note was pinned to the table with a knife. It said, "She's waiting in the basement." My heart hammered. The caretaker must have done this. I turned to Lucas, about to speak, but he suddenly looked glassy-eyed. His gaze locked onto the open door. "I'll be right back," he muttered in a flat tone, heading into the dark yard. "Lucas, no!" I yelled, chasing after him. Outside was blackness, the forest looming. I saw him vanish around the corner of the lodge. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing twisted branches and the rotted stump of a fallen tree. The wind carried faint whispers that I could barely understand. "Chosen, him, come." Circling the lodge, I found Lucas near a side window. He was just standing there, staring into space. When I touched his arm, he nearly jumped out of his skin. "What the hell, Rach?" he gasped, sounding like himself again. I don't remember coming out here." I was breathless, tears pricking my eyes. "We're getting inside now." We stumbled back through the open door, which slammed shut behind us with a force that rattled the windows. My heart was in my throat. Lucas looked dazed. There was a smear of mud on his bare feet as though he'd walked a distance. Yet he swore he remembered nothing. We huddled in the foyer, me holding the flashlight, Lucas trembling. I didn't know what was real anymore. The caretaker's note about the basement hovered in my mind. Why would we go down there? Maybe that was exactly where we needed to go to find a way out. Or maybe it was a trap. At that moment, a scraping sound came from beneath the floor, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. The lodge had a basement, presumably, but we hadn't explored it yet. My instincts screamed that we should never go down there. But the caretaker's message was too pointed to ignore. Lucas insisted he wanted to see what was down there. Maybe find a breaker box or some way to restore stable power. I, on the other hand, had a gnawing dread in my stomach. But a small part of me thought about the possibility of a back door or a storm exit in the basement. If we couldn't get out through the main floor, maybe we could from below. In the hallway, by a locked closet door, we found a hatch leading down. The old wooden steps were steep, plunging into darkness. Musty, stagnant air wafted up as we pried open the hatch. I nearly gagged. Lucas led with the flashlight, and I followed, clinging to the iron poker. The basement was a single large room with dirt walls. Old shelves lined one side, filled with dusty jars. A single overhead bulb flickered, giving just enough light to see that the floor was cracked concrete, and a tangle of old pipes ran across the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a small table piled with random objects: a comb, a hair ribbon, a photograph, a ring. Each item looked old-fashioned, like mementos from people who might have stayed here decades ago. There was a single door at the far end, heavily padlocked. Something about that locked door made my skin crawl, as though something on the other side was watching us. The overhead bulb dimmed to near darkness, then flared again. Lucas pointed the flashlight around, eventually landing on something etched into the far wall, a large mural that mirrored the carving on the well. The figure of a tall woman with hollow eyes, arms outstretched, seemed to stare at us from the stone. Beneath it was scrawled, "She takes what she's owed." I swallowed hard. We shouldn't be here. Lucas approached the mural, transfixed. He reached out as if to touch it, but then jerked his hand back. I looked around for the caretaker, for any sign of life, but there was nothing but the flickering bulb. The scraping noise returned, louder now. I realized with horror that it came from behind the locked door. It sounded like nails or claws scratching at metal. I felt a wave of nausea. "Let's go," I whispered urgently. "Please." Lucas hesitated, eyes flicking between me and the door. He seemed almost drawn to it. When he finally turned away, relief flooded me. We hurried back towards the stairs. Halfway up, the overhead bulb blew out with a pop, plunging the basement into darkness. We scrambled up, shoving the hatch closed behind us, hearts pounding. Back in the hallway, we realized we could hear the caretaker speaking, somewhere in the lodge. His voice echoed in the corridors, but the words were muffled. We raced from room to room, searching, but each time the voice seemed to move. A closet door slammed or a window rattled. It felt like we were chasing a phantom. Finally, after an hour of fruitless searching, we returned to the foyer. Lucas's expression was haunted, his face drawn and pale. He squeezed my hand. eyes filled with fear and an unspoken apology for bringing me here. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have taken you somewhere nice, a real hotel. I tried to comfort him, but before I could speak, a wave of dizziness crashed over me, forcing me to sit on the dusty couch. My watch read 9:57 p.m., but I was so exhausted it might as well have been 3 o'clock in the morning. I told Lucas I needed a little rest, even a short nap, just to recharge enough to keep going. He nodded, urging me to lie down. He promised to stay awake and keep watch. My eyelids felt heavy, like lead. As I slipped into uneasy sleep, I heard that soft whisper again. "Rachel? Rachel? Who are you?" I wasn't sure if it was Lucas or something else. When I opened my eyes, Lucas was gone. The lamp in the foyer was still on, but it looked dimmer, flickering. The couch felt damp, like I'd been sweating, or maybe the fabric had absorbed moisture from the air. My watch said 3:27 a.m., but I had no idea if that was accurate. The old clock on the mantel just spun in lazy circles. Heart hammering. I stood, calling his name. No answer. I searched the ground floor, then climbed the stairs to our bedroom. The door was wide open. Inside, the bed was unmade, the covers half on the floor. The closet door hung ajar. No Lucas. I checked the other rooms on the second floor, mostly dusty, unused bedrooms. All empty. A new note lay on the floor near the top of the stairs. He went for wood. My throat went dry. The caretaker again, or was it Lucas who wrote this? I hurried downstairs, rummaging through drawers until I found a heavy flashlight that still worked. Then, with no other options, I opened the back door and stepped outside. The wind whipped at my hair, the cold biting through my clothes. The forest was pitch black, only faint moonlight casting silver outlines on the trees. I followed a trail of footprints that led away from the lodge, definitely Lucas's size and shape. I tracked them for maybe 5 minutes into the pines. My flashlight beam danced over gnarled branches. Eventually, the trail led to a small clearing. Lucas was there, standing with an armful of firewood, gazing up at the starless sky. His posture was rigid, eyes wide. He didn't move when I approached. "Lucas?" I called softly, stepping closer. He turned slowly, revealing a too-wide grin that didn't reach his eyes. I'd never seen him smile like that. His lips seemed stretched, trembling. "Rachel," he said in a flat tone. "I found wood." Something about the way he spoke made my blood run cold. His expression was vacant, except for that unsettling grin. He kept the wood pressed against his chest as he stared at me. I reached for his free arm. "Are you okay?" He blinked, slowly, too slowly, as if the act required intense effort. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice wavered. "It's just so cold tonight." I noticed goosebumps on his arms and realized he was wearing only a thin shirt, despite the freezing temperature. I dropped the flashlight and flung my arms around him, trying to warm him. The moment I touched him, I recoiled. His skin felt like ice. "Come on," I urged. "We need to get inside, get you by the fire." He simply nodded, face still contorted in that creepy, drawn-out grin. As we walked back, I tried to talk, but he didn't respond. He just kept blinking in that slow, uneven way. I led him into the lodge, piling the wood near the fireplace. I set about lighting it, using the last match we had. Once again, the flames guttered green. Lucas stood by, unmoving, still holding a single piece of wood in his hand, staring at it like he couldn't remember what it was for. I finally got the fire going and turned to him. "Lucas, talk to me, please." He slowly raised his gaze from the log. His eyes looked darker than usual. "Rachel, do you love me?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course I do, you know I do," I said. tears threatening to spill. "We've been together for 4 years. He stepped closer, and in the firelight his features looked gaunt, almost hollow. He tilted his head, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. "Then why would you betray me?" "Betray you? What are you talking about?" My voice trembled. "I would never—" He took a step back, that grin curling again in a way that sent chills through my veins. Then he turned and walked toward the stairs, each step deliberate. I trailed behind him, fear gripping my heart. At the top of the landing, he stopped, glancing over his shoulder with that eerie smile. "She says you're lying. She says you don't love me at all." Then, in a flash, he lunged forward and shoved me. I stumbled, fell back down the few steps I'd climbed, landing hard on my side. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder. I gasped, tears blurring my vision. Lucas stood at the top, staring with wide eyes. A moment later, confusion crossed his face like he didn't understand what he'd just done. I forced myself up, wincing. "Lucas, please, whatever's happening, fight it." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness of one of the guest rooms. I limped into the foyer, tears streaming down my cheeks. The fire glowed green through the open doorway to the living room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I felt trapped, helpless. Suddenly, a voice behind me made me nearly jump out of my skin. "Best let it happen clean," Harlan said softly. I spun around. The caretaker stood by the front door, leaning against the wall. His eyes gleamed in the flickering light. "He's already hers," he continued, voice full of resignation. "He was chosen the moment he disrespected this land. No use fighting." "Why?" I shouted at him, rage fueling me. "What is this place? Who is old Marla?" He shrugged, pushing off the wall. "We serve her. She's older than these mountains. She takes who she wants in exchange for letting the rest of us live." "You locked us in here with that monster?" I accused. He lowered his head. "I didn't lock you in, she did. This lodge, it's her domain." He lifted his gaze to me. "She needs new life, new energy to keep going. Lucas is already half gone." I charged at him, brandishing the iron poker. He recoiled, but he didn't run. "Open the door," I hissed through clenched teeth. "Let us leave, now." He shook his head. "It's not my power, only she can release you." I wanted to hit him, to break every bone in his body for what he was letting happen, but a new scream from upstairs halted me. I whirled and sprinted for the stairs, ignoring Harlan as he called after me. "Don't do it. Don't challenge her." Upstairs, I followed the sound of strangled cries. They led me to our bedroom. The door was wide open, and inside, Lucas stood by the window, struggling in silent agony, hands clawing at his own throat. His eyes were bulging, his lips parted in a silent scream. An unnatural darkness swirled behind him, almost like a wraith, with the outline of a gaunt woman, arms reaching around him from behind. No features, just hollow pits for eyes. I reacted without thinking. I lunged, swinging the iron poker. It passed through the shape, meeting no resistance. Lucas choked and collapsed to his knees, gasping. When I blinked, the dark figure was gone, as though it had never been there. Lucas looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "Rachel," he rasped. "What's happening?" "I can't." His face twisted, a grimace of pain. "She's in my head. It hurts." I threw the poker aside and wrapped my arms around him. "We're leaving together, okay? We'll find a way." He trembled in my embrace, breathing shallowly. "I'm scared," he whispered. I don't want to die." The caretaker stood in the hallway, watching with pity in his eyes. "You can't save him," he murmured. "She's too strong." I scrambled, mind racing. Maybe we can drive her out, injure her somehow, burn the lodge down. A faint smile touched Harlan's lips. You can try, but she won't let you. She's had centuries of practice. Another moan tore from Lucas's throat. I laid him on the bed, took a shaky breath, and turned to the caretaker. Help me, or I swear I'll kill you, I snarled. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. Maybe there's a chance. Sometimes a life can be traded, a sacrifice. But it ain't gonna be me. He met my gaze with a hardened expression. You or him? I felt the weight of those words sink in. No, there has to be another way. A sudden crash came from below, as though the entire lodge shook. The lights flickered out, leaving us in near total darkness except for my small flashlight. Lucas groaned again, convulsing. His lips moved without sound. Then, in a voice not his own, he rasped, "Rachel, why won't you come to me?" Something inside me snapped. I turned and rushed back downstairs, searching for anything flammable. Cans of lighter fluid, old rags, anything. If we couldn't break the windows or doors, maybe we could destroy the lodge from the inside. I found a small stash of kerosene in the supply closet near the kitchen. As I grabbed it, I heard Harlan from the landing. "It'll kill him too," he warned. I didn't stop. I couldn't let some ancient demon keep Lucas's soul in eternal torment. Maybe it was selfish, maybe it was madness, but I couldn't give up on him, or condemn him to this twisted existence. As I soaked parts of the living room in kerosene, the caretaker just stood there, shaking his head. "You'll only make her angry," he said quietly. I lit a match. For a terrifying second, I doubted myself. Then I flung it onto the soaked carpet. Flames burst up, their color shifting from orange to that sickly green. The fire spread quickly, licking the walls. I bolted upstairs to retrieve Lucas. Thick smoke already curled along the ceiling. When I got to our bedroom, he was on his feet, swaying, that chilling grin back on his face. "Rachel, what did you do?" he asked, in a voice that echoed with an otherworldly resonance. He lunged for me, nails scratching at my arm. I cried out but managed to twist aside. "Lucas, snap out of it," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "We have to go, now!" He laughed, a shrill, terrible sound. Then he grabbed my wrist with cold strength, pushing me against the wall. His eyes glowed with a greenish reflection of the fire, or maybe something else. "You can't have him!" I screamed at the entity controlling him, half sobbing. "Let him go!" In a sudden burst of desperate strength, I twisted free, grabbed Lucas's face in my hands, and forced him to look at me. "Lucas," I pleaded, "I love you. Please come back to me." For a second, his features softened. His eyes glistened with tears. Then he seized up, mouth gaping in a silent scream. Greenish veins bulged at his temples. With his uninjured arm, he swung at me. I ducked, grabbing a broken piece of chair leg that was lying on the floor. As he lunged again, I swung, connecting with his temple. He crumpled, eyes rolling back. My heart wrenched. What if I'd killed him? "Come on," I sobbed, hauling him up. He was half-conscious, stumbling. Smoke choked the air. Flames crackled from below. We made it into the hallway, only to find the stairs engulfed in fire. Harlan was nowhere to be seen. The caretaker had vanished again. My eyes stung from the smoke, and Lucas groaned, leaning heavily on me. A wave of heat forced us back. We coughed, eyes watering. It looked like we were trapped on the second floor. "Window," Lucas rasped, sounding more like himself. We hobbled to the bedroom window. Outside, the forest glowed with reflected firelight. The ground was still a jumbled mess of roots and rocks, but I saw an area that looked like it might be safer to land on. Without hesitation, I pushed the window open. The flames were raging behind us, If we stayed, we'd burn alive. "Hold on to me," I shouted. Lucas wrapped his good arm around my waist. We swung one leg out, then the other. Together, we jumped. The impact was devastating. We slammed into a patch of thick undergrowth, rolling. Pain exploded in my right ankle, and Lucas let out a sharp cry, clutching his shoulder. But we were alive, battered and coughing in the cold night air. The lodge behind us was an inferno, flames climbing up the walls, devouring the ancient wood. I expected the caretaker to rush out or someone to call for help, but there was only the roaring fire and the howling wind. Lucas lay on the ground, trembling. I knelt beside him, wincing at my own pain, pressing a hand to his cheek. He was burning up with fever. His eyes flickered open, tear-filled, as though some immense weight had been lifted from him. "Rachel," he whispered, voice raw. "It hurts, but I think she's gone." I looked back at the lodge. The entire roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks shooting skyward. Could we truly have destroyed that ancient entity? Or was she still lurking somewhere, furious, waiting for another chance? With my arm around Lucas, we staggered away from the blaze. The heat on our backs was intense. We walked blindly into the trees. No sense of direction, just away. We stumbled for what felt like hours, tripping over roots, leaning on each other for support. Eventually, we found a gravel road that wound through the pines. A single sign read, "Seneca Scenic Highway 2 miles. Relief flooded my chest. Maybe we were finally free. Lucas was half delirious by then. I practically dragged him along, ignoring the throbbing in my ankle, the smoke-laden cough tearing at my lungs. Near dawn, the forest began to thin. We emerged onto a real road, cracked asphalt that led to a cluster of tiny houses and a closed-up gas station. There, we collapsed on the edge of the pavement. A pickup truck stopped. A middle-aged woman rolled down her window, her face alight with concern. She didn't question much, just asked if we needed a hospital. We told her we'd been in an accident at a lodge near Seneca Rocks. She said she was from a nearby town and that the old Whispering Pines place had burned down decades ago. I argued, confused, telling her we'd just been there. She gave me a strange look. "Honey, that place was boarded up when I was a kid. No caretakers lived there for at least 30 years. My vision spun. I tried to respond, but darkness closed over me. I woke up in a hospital bed, tubes in my arm. Lucas was in another room, undergoing tests for a severe concussion and a shattered shoulder. The doctors said we'd been found in rough condition, but that we'd survive. Local authorities questioned me about what happened, but everything I told them sounded insane. Eventually, they chalked it up to an abandoned property that we'd stumbled upon, plus an accidental fire. They couldn't explain the time loops, the caretaker, or the missing car. The official report was that we must have gotten lost, our vehicle stolen or misplaced. No sign of a caretaker named Harlan. The structures in that area had mostly collapsed years ago. Lucas and I left West Virginia as soon as we were discharged. I tried to resume my normal life, but nightmares still haunt me. Nightmares of green flames, the hiss of a woman's voice behind the walls. Sometimes, Lucas stares out the window with unfocused eyes, like he's listening to something I can't hear. He claims it's nothing, but I see his hand tremble. We never found our car. The insurance company declared it stolen. My camera's memory card was completely blank, no matter how many pictures I swore I took. The few personal items we recovered were stained with mildew, as if they'd been sitting in water for decades. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up to see Lucas standing in the corner of our bedroom, staring at me. He doesn't blink. When I call his name, he eventually snaps out of it, claiming he doesn't remember getting up. The doctors say it might be trauma. I'm not so sure. I still wonder if we truly escaped, or if we just brought old Marla's influence back with us. In the dim reflection of the bathroom mirror, sometimes I glimpse movement that isn't mine. At the edges of my vision, I see a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, arms outstretched. Then I blink, and it's gone. Every day I ask myself if this is my real life or just another loop in her domain. Every day I pray she doesn't decide to finish what she started in those cursed woods. Because I can still hear her whisper in my dreams, telling me it's not over. Telling me she's still waiting. And worst of all, reminding me that sometimes the only way out of her grasp is to become hers entirely. My name is Jake Grayson. I'm 30 years old. This happened in late October 2023. It's taken me a long time to process everything, to accept what I experienced and what I did. I have no choice now but to lay it all out. The events, the horror, the blood, and the loss. Maybe writing this down will free me, or maybe it will bind me to it forever. I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh, in a rowdy neighborhood where the closest thing to nature was a weedy city park. I never served in the military, never had any special combat training. I'm an ordinary guy who works a dreary office job, the kind where you stare at a spreadsheet for hours and try to ignore the flickering fluorescent lights. My one real passion is photography. I'm pretty good at capturing landscapes, the way mist clings to tree trunks in the morning, the way evening sun filters through leaves and sets them ablaze. I'd been itching for a real adventure. Going on short day hikes near the city wasn't enough. I wanted somewhere wild, somewhere that would push me past my comfort zone. My friend, well, ex-friend, Darren Holloway had been on my mind. We hadn't spoken in a while after a personal falling out, but I knew he was an avid outdoorsman. He used to post pictures of himself scaling cliffs and camping in the middle of nowhere. I thought maybe if we reconnected we could bury our grudges. Time had passed. Maybe we could start again. A few weeks before Halloween, Darren and I decided on the Cranberry Glades in West Virginia. The name alone gave me a thrill. The area is known for its unique bogs, for the carnivorous plants and the thick mist that rolls in every night. It sounded perfect for photography, and more importantly, it sounded remote. We'd be forced to rely on each other, which might fix our friendship if there was anything left to fix. I brought my German Shepherd, Bandit. He's 5 years old, loyal to a fault, and fearless. Or so I thought. As soon as we neared the main trailhead, I felt him tremble. Perhaps he was just excited or nervous. I didn't pay much attention. I was too busy thinking about how strange the tree line looked. The branches bent in weird angles, almost like they were leaning away from the bog as if in fear. But I chalked it up to the area's natural quirkiness. We parked my old Subaru at a gravel pull-off by a weather-beaten sign. A thick fog blanketed the place, reducing visibility so much it felt like we were entering a different world. Darren heaved his backpack onto his shoulders and shook my hand like we were business partners. I nodded. I'll admit, I still harbored a fair bit of resentment toward him. He had dated my ex-girlfriend a few months after we broke up. I'd always felt betrayed, but I told myself I was over it. This trip, I hoped, would close that chapter. "Let's go," Darren said. He sounded eager, though he kept glancing at the sky. The sun was still high, but the fog made it look more like late afternoon than midday. We stepped off the paved road and into the wilderness. My first impression was that it was too quiet. No birds, no rustling of small creatures, nothing. The only noise came from our boots on the soggy ground. Moss squished underfoot, and every now and then my ankles threatened to sink into the bog. After a couple of hours, we found a reasonably dry clearing to pitch camp. I was snapping photographs of the mist swirling over a stagnant pond when Darren said, "You know, rumor is that this place is haunted." I scoffed. That's half the reason I picked it. Maybe I'll get a ghost shot. That'd be worth a fortune." He didn't laugh. Instead, he stared into the fog as if it might form into something recognizable. "Locals talk about a banshee," he said. "Aelith, I think they call her. Some vengeful spirit who roams the bog, luring hikers to their deaths." "Sounds cliché," I replied, though a shiver did run up my spine. Darren had always been one for ghost stories, and normally I found them entertaining. But out here, in the damp cold, with the sky graying out of turn, it felt a lot less like a joke. We set up the tent quickly. Bandit circled around it, tail low, sniffing in every direction. He barked once, a short, sharp bark, and stared into the tree line. I checked my watch, 3 p.m., but the gloom made it feel like twilight. I put my phone on airplane mode to conserve battery. The signal was already non-existent. By the time we finished collecting firewood, the mist had gotten denser, and the temperature dropped. I realized Darren had been quiet for a while. It bothered me because we were supposed to be mending fences, yet it felt like we were drifting further apart. I tried to start a conversation about old times, like the night we went bar hopping and ended up at the wrong bus station at 3:00 a.m., but he barely responded. He just kept scanning the woods. The fire was hard to light. Every time the sparks caught, the flames would gutter and die. Eventually, after a lot of coaxing, it took hold, but the flames burned a sickly green for a moment before settling into the usual orange glow. I tried to laugh it off, blaming the damp wood, but Darren was spooked. I could see it in his eyes. That night, Bandit curled up at my feet, pressing against me like he wanted reassurance. I drifted off, thinking about the photos I would take in the morning, hoping to catch some early sunlight piercing the fog. I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or awake when I first heard it. A piercing, wavering cry that seemed to originate from somewhere in the distance. It wasn't a coyote. The pitch was too high, too resonant. It sounded like metal scraping on metal, twisted into the shape of a woman's scream. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. Bandit was trembling against my thigh, ears flattened. Darren woke too. His face was pale in the dim glow of the dying embers. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. He shook his head, not even attempting a joke. "Listen," he mouthed. The scream came again, more distant this time. Then silence. Oppressive, suffocating silence. Even the crickets and frogs had gone mute. The air felt suddenly stale, and for a moment I could have sworn time itself held its breath. Neither of us slept much after that. At one point, Darren tried to turn on his phone to check the time, but it wouldn't respond. The battery had mysteriously drained to 0. My watch read 1:17 a.m., then it jumped to 3:05 a.m. in the space of a few seconds, ticking forward so fast I almost dropped it. I tapped the glass, stared. A cheap watch can malfunction, I told myself, but the moment left me uneasy. At dawn, whatever dawn meant in that mist, we stumbled out of the tent to find a new horror. Our backpacks were missing. After a short search, we discovered mine near a cluster of ferns. It had been torn open, the side pocket dangling by threads. All of my food was gone, replaced by slimy lumps of rotting meat that smelled like roadkill. Darren's pack was nowhere to be found. As we were processing that, Bandit started barking toward the path we'd come in on. A woman appeared in the haze. She wore a dark green uniform and carried a flashlight. She identified herself as Amy Wallace, a park ranger. She immediately demanded to know why we were in a restricted area. Restricted? The map didn't say anything about that, I replied. She pointed to a laminated sign tied around a nearby tree, one we absolutely had not seen the day before, indicating that this portion of the glades was off-limits due to unstable ground and protected species. She glared at us like we were careless kids. "This place can be dangerous," she said, scanning our campsite. Her expression softened when she saw how rattled we were. "But you look like you've had a worse night than just a rough campsite." I told her about the screaming and about our bizarre gear trouble. I left out the rotting meat because it sounded too insane. She frowned, like she was holding back a comment, then asked to see the torn backpack. I shrugged and took her to it. She bent down and gingerly picked it up. For a moment, the stench of decay made her eyes water, and she dropped it. "Did you pack this?" she demanded. Her voice shook slightly, betraying her attempt at composure. "No," I said. "That was just there." Amy looked uneasy. "You sure you're alone out here?" she asked. Darren and I exchanged glances. "We heard a scream," he offered, "but that's it. We're not messing around with any pranks, if that's what you're implying." Amy glanced around the small clearing, eyes narrowed. "We need to get you two out of here," she said firmly. "Follow me back to the main trail." I agreed, too relieved at the prospect of leaving to argue about salvaging my photography trip. But Darren tensed up. "Wait," he snapped. "My gear, we can't just leave it. My phone, everything is gone. We can't walk out without water or supplies." Amy hesitated. "Fine," she said. "I'll help you search quickly. But if we don't find it soon, we're heading back. Understood?" Darren nodded. We split up. Amy went upstream to check near a small cluster of trees. Darren circled around the clearing. I stuck close to Bandit, who sniffed the ground intently. We moved slowly, calling out Darren's name, though I wasn't sure why. He wasn't missing, he was just out of sight. But something about that morning had rattled me to my core, and I felt the need to keep verbal contact. We didn't find Darren's pack. Instead, we found flattened grass and an odd circle of stones arranged in the shape of an eye, just a few yards from our tent. It was definitely unnatural, but I couldn't figure out if it was some kind of marker or just a bizarre accident. Bandit whined, muzzle low to the ground. When we returned to the site, we saw Amy standing near the water's edge, hands on her hips. She shook her head at Darren. "No sign," she told him. Then she turned to me. "We're going, now." "Yeah," I said. "Let's get out of here." The thought of that unearthly scream coming back at night made my skin crawl. "Sure," Darren mumbled, but he sounded distracted. He was scanning the bog as though expecting something to pop out at any second. We started walking. Amy led the way, shining her flashlight occasionally to highlight roots and soggy patches. Even in daylight, the mist was so thick it felt like dusk. About half an hour in, Bandit growled and stopped walking. He planted himself, ears back. I tried to coax him forward, but he wouldn't budge. Amy approached, confusion on her face. "What's wrong with your dog?" Before I could answer, I heard it again. That scream, piercing, echoing through the trees, fading into a low hiss at the end. My heart dropped. Amy's eyes widened. Even she, a seasoned park ranger, looked shaken. Darren spun around in a circle, searching the wall of fog. Then everything happened so fast. Bandit lunged, barking wildly at something behind a tree. Amy rushed toward him to see what he was after. I lost sight of them both for maybe 5 seconds in that dense fog. Then, abruptly, Amy's scream drowned out Bandit's barking. Darren and I crashed through the undergrowth and found her lying on her back, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent howl of terror. Blood trickled from her nose. Her face looked impossibly old, like someone had drained the life out of her. No bite marks, no claw wounds, just a vacant expression of horror. "Amy!" I yelled, kneeling beside her. She didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell faintly, so she was alive, but barely. Darren took a step back. "We need to get her help," he said, voice shaking. "Jake, we gotta move." I nodded, but as I reached to pick her up, her eyes snapped into focus on me, locking in a way that made my stomach lurch. Her lips moved, shaping words that came out in a barely audible rasp. "Don't bury me. She's in the ground." She managed those words, then shuddered, going completely still. Her body sagged. I touched her neck, searching for a pulse. There was none. Darren swore, stumbling back. Bandit whimpered, pressing his body close to my leg. I wanted to say something to comfort Darren, to comfort myself, but the shock was too great. My brain refused to process how a healthy woman could just die like that. "We have to do something," Darren repeated. "We can't leave her here." I wiped my brow. My face was clammy. "We can't bury her," I said, remembering her last words. She said not to. Maybe we should mark the spot, then come back with proper help. The tension in Darren's jaw showed his disagreement, but he didn't argue. We were in no position to deal with a burial, especially when the ground was so boggy. We decided to wrap her in her jacket and leave a tall, broken branch near the body as a marker. It felt gruesome and wrong, but I kept recalling her final plea. We hadn't been with her for more than a couple hours, but she had tried to help us, tried to guide us out. With trembling hands, we did what we could. I took note of the surroundings, trying to memorize any landmarks. The mist made everything look like a copy of itself, but I promised myself we'd get her proper attention once we found the authorities. That was the logical plan. By the time we composed ourselves enough to leave, the day had grown darker, though my watch still insisted it was around noon. The sense of time was all twisted up. Darren and I trudged forward, unsteady, hearts pounding. "I've got to find my gear," Darren muttered at one point. I stared at him. "Are you nuts? We just saw her, Amy, die. We need to get out of here now. Let's go back to the car." He squared his shoulders, more stubborn than ever. "Jake, it's not safe to keep going without more supplies. Our phones are dead. We have no food. My gear has both, plus a water filtration kit. We won't last out here if we get lost." I tried to reason with him that the car was only a few hours away, that we could push through, but Darren refused. We got into a heated argument. I accused him of being callous, of caring more about his equipment than Amy's death. He shot back that I was a fool with no sense of real survival tactics, a city boy playing hero. He even brought up my ex-girlfriend, implying that's the reason I blamed him for everything. Insults and anger spilled out unrestrained. Then he shoved me. I staggered, half losing my balance on the slick ground. Bandit snarled, stepping between us. Darren glared at me for a moment, then spun around and walked away, into the haze of trees. I watched him vanish, half expecting him to turn back, to realize we shouldn't be splitting up, but he didn't. I was alone with Bandit, near the body of a dead ranger somewhere in an off-limits section of the Cranberry Glades. My chest felt tight, and not just from fear. The weight of our broken friendship, the shock of Amy's death, and the sheer dread of the situation pressed down on me. I cursed, trying to get my thoughts together. I wanted to go after Darren, but every direction looked the same in that oppressive fog. If I lost my bearings, I might never find the car. I decided to head west, or what I thought was west, using my useless compass and the sun's dim glow as a guide. My logic was that the trailhead should be roughly that way. For what felt like hours, Bandit and I trudged through boggy ground. I checked my watch now and then, but the readouts made no sense. The second hand would spin wildly before freezing, and the time jumped sporadically. 1:45 p.m. to 6:23 p.m., then back to 4:10 p.m. Every time I looked, my stomach twisted. Something was horribly wrong in this place. Eventually, we stumbled upon a clearing that looked familiar. I froze, heart thumping. In the center stood a circle of rocks shaped like an eye, the same pattern we'd seen near our camp. Had I walked in a giant circle? Possible. I had made a concerted effort to keep moving in one direction, but the evidence was right there. Bandit growled low in his throat. My gaze shifted to the other side of the clearing, where something dark lay motionless. My pack, the one we had left behind earlier. It was upright, half open. Warily, I stepped forward and nudged it with my foot. No rotting meat this time, just some of my old gear. Flashlight, a few scattered battery packs. "Is this a joke?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. Bandit sniffed around the pack, then lifted his nose to the air and whimpered. The fog shifted, almost like it parted for a second, revealing a figure standing among the twisted trees. My heart leapt. I thought it might be Darren. But as soon as I blinked, the figure was gone. I rummaged through the bag. Most of my supplies were missing, but I found some energy bars that looked untouched. Hungry, I tore one open, only to drop it in revulsion. The inside was green with mold, though I'd only packed it the day before. I hurled it aside. A wave of nausea swept over me, and for a second, I was sure I'd vomit. The stench of bog water and decayed plant matter seemed to cling to every breath. We needed to move. But where? "Come on, Bandit," I muttered, forcing one foot in front of the other. I tried to head east this time, convinced that if the bog was messing with my sense of direction, maybe I should try a different route. We walked. The hours bled into each other. The sky never got brighter or darker. My watch was stuck at 11:59 now, as if it refused to move forward. My arms and legs felt like lead. Finally, we came upon a shallow creek that might have been connected to the main river system. That gave me hope. Water flows downhill, so maybe if we followed it, we'd reach a known landmark. We followed the creek until it led to a murky, stagnant pool. Dead end. Once again, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts screamed that we were being watched. Bandit's ears pricked. He let out a low growl. I shone my flashlight around. A shape stood at the edge of the water, half shrouded in the swirling gray mist. "Darren," I called, stepping forward. The shape moved, revealing Darren's face or something close to it. He smiled. A bizarre, too-wide grin. Relief warred with unease in my chest. He wore the same clothes, but they were damp and smeared with mud. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, making him look gaunt. I opened my mouth to demand why he'd left me like that, but as soon as I locked eyes with him, my mouth went dry. He blinked twice, very slowly. "Jake," he said, voice flat. "I found a way out." Something in his tone made me shiver. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer but keeping a hand near my knife. Bandit stood stiff-legged, teeth bared. Darren's smile stayed plastered on his face for a few beats too long. "Yes. Great. Follow me." I studied him. His arms looked strange, slightly too long or maybe too loose in the joints. "What happened to your gear?" I asked. He blinked again, too slowly. "It's safe," he said, not answering my question. "I left it. We don't need it anymore." A cold dread formed in my stomach. This wasn't Darren. Something about his stance was so unnatural, and Bandit's reaction confirmed it. Still, Darren was my friend. Maybe shock and dehydration were messing with his mind. He could be delirious. I had to check. "Where is Amy's body?" I asked, deciding to test him. He stared at me with a vacant expression. "Amy who?" he echoed. "You know who?" My voice rose. "Amy Wallace, the park ranger. She died and we left her." He cackled. A grating, hollow sound that sent Bandit into a barking frenzy. Then he clamped his mouth shut and resumed that eerie smile. "Jake," he said softly, I found the way out. Follow me." He didn't wait for my response. He turned and started walking along the perimeter of the stagnant water, his movements weirdly stiff. A chill ran through me. Every part of me screamed not to trust him. But if there was a chance he'd found a real route, maybe I had to try. Maybe he was just traumatized. I swallowed, motioned for Bandit to follow, and set off behind him, staying a few yards back. We walked for what felt like a mile, in near silence. Darren didn't tire, didn't pause. Now and then he'd look over his shoulder to see if I was still behind him. Every time, his eyes would lock on mine, unblinking for a few seconds. Then he'd continue. It was like following a man who had lost everything human except for the bare mechanics of walking and talking. The trees grew denser, the ground more uneven. Then we reached a small slope that led into a hollow enclosed by a thick brush. Darren stopped at the edge and pointed. I peered down. The hollow was riddled with twisting roots, and the mist churned in the center like a living thing. "This is where she lives," Darren said. My throat constricted. "Who?" He turned slowly, that grin stretching across his face. "Aelith. She chose me, Jake. She wants you too." Fear hammered in my chest. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Aelith, the banshee from local legends. Darren must have encountered her or something and lost his mind. But seeing him stand there so unnervingly inhuman, I realized it wasn't just madness. Something had taken hold of him, something far beyond my understanding. "No," I said, stepping back. "Darren, we have to leave." He moved impossibly fast, lunging at me with the jerky motions. He tackled me to the ground, and I barely managed to keep his face away from mine. His breath was foul, like decaying leaves. He hissed, nails scraping against my jacket. Bandit barked furiously, biting at Darren's pant leg. Darren reacted by kicking out with unnatural strength, sending Bandit yelping and tumbling onto the muddy ground. Adrenaline surged through me. I fought back, grappling with Darren as he tried to wrap his hands around my throat. His eyes were black, pupils blown wide, iris barely visible. I reached for my survival knife with trembling fingers. The moment I touched the hilt, he let out a furious shriek that was nearly identical to that distant scream we'd heard the night before. "Darren, stop!" I shouted, but there was no recognition in his gaze. With one desperate motion, I freed the knife and plunged it into his side. He stiffened, face contorting into something like pain, but also twisted glee. Dark liquid oozed from the wound, thicker than blood and black as tar. He let out a ragged exhale, then sank back, sliding off me onto the wet ground. I scrambled up, panting, and stared at him. He lay there, eyes still open. He laughed softly, the sound garbled with fluid. "She chose me," he rasped, black dribble at the corner of his mouth. "You're next." He coughed, body seizing. Then he went still. I could only gape, chest heaving. It felt like I had jumped into an alternate reality. I'd just killed my friend, or what used to be my friend. Bandit limped to my side, favoring one paw. I knelt, stroking his head, trying to calm both of us, though my own heart felt like it was about to burst. I don't remember how long I crouched there, staring at Darren's body. The mist swirled around me, and the day was locked in its eternal dusk. A black tar-like substance was soaking into the muddy ground from Darren's wound. Then, from somewhere beyond that thick bank of mist, came the scream again. My stomach twisted in terror. I had to get out of here. I stumbled back the way we'd come, half dragging Bandit. My mind was a hurricane of guilt, fear, sorrow, and disbelief. Darren was dead, Amy was dead. We were in a nightmarish bog that seemed to have abandoned all natural laws. Time was meaningless. Equipment failed. Food rotted in minutes, and some malevolent presence wanted me, had tried to lure me just like it lured Darren. It might sound cowardly, but at that point, my sole focus was survival. I didn't care about the photography, about the pride that brought me here, or even about reconciling with Darren's memory. My only goal was to reach my car and get Bandit out alive. I half walked, half ran through the trees, ignoring branches that tore at my arms, ignoring the cramps in my stomach. I tried to keep track of my direction. If the sun was behind me, maybe I could maintain a consistent heading, assuming that the sun even existed in this warped place. Each time I glimpsed the sky, it looked the same, a uniform gray haze with no discernible light source. Bandit whimpered, limping beside me. I knew he needed rest, but stopping for any length of time felt suicidal. Still, after an untold span of stumbling through the bog, we had to pause. My lungs burned with each breath. I found a cluster of pines that offered minimal shelter. There, I forced myself to check Bandit's paw. No open wounds, but he flinched when I touched it. Maybe it was just a sprain. I whispered, "Good boy," over and over, wishing I could do more. My water was gone, lost with the pack. And yet I wasn't thirsty. Another strange detail. Maybe the bog's dampness had sapped my thirst, or maybe my body was shutting down. As I sat there, head drooping, I became aware of a faint distortion in the surrounding air. The trees seemed to flicker, as if the fog was passing through them in waves. The light brightened momentarily, then dimmed, like a lamp on a bad circuit. A memory of Darren's twisted grin flashed through my mind. My stomach churned with nausea. I struggled to stand up. We couldn't stay here. We had to keep moving. I have no idea how long we walked. My watch was stuck at 11:59, refusing to budge. Eventually, the ground began to slope upward, and the dampness receded. Hope flared in me. Maybe we were nearing the parking area. The bog must be lower ground, so if we climbed, we might reach the road. The slope ended at a small ravine, forced upon us by a rocky outcrop. I had to pick my way carefully across the stones. Bandit struggled with his limp, but he managed. Then, near the ravine, I saw a path. A real, honest-to-God path, with footprints and a faint impression of tire tracks. My pulse quickened. We followed it. My heart soared when I finally spotted the silhouette of my Subaru through the fog. I actually let out a laugh of relief. The closer I got, the more my hope soared, until it felt like a balloon that might burst. I clambered over a broken fence, one I didn't remember being there, and limped the last stretch. There it was, my battered Subaru, right where I'd parked it. Except, something looked off. The paint was covered in a thick layer of filth, and the tires were caked in dried mud as if it had been sitting there unused for months. I didn't care. I pulled the handle, half expecting it to be locked. The door swung open with a squeal that made my teeth clench. Bandit hopped into the passenger seat without hesitation. I collapsed behind the wheel, fumbling for the keys in my jacket pocket. They were still there. I exhaled, inserted the key, and turned. Nothing. No clicks, no engine turnover, just silence. I tried again. Silence. I cursed, banging my fist on the steering wheel. The car was dead, like everything else. But then, out of desperation, I pumped the gas and tried a third time. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. My relief was so immense I could have cried. I fumbled to shift into reverse, glancing at Bandit, who sat panting beside me. "We made it," I whispered like a prayer. "We're getting out." The Subaru backed up, tires spinning on the slimy ground, but eventually caught traction. I turned it around, aiming for the main road. The gloom was still thick, but if I stuck to the direction of the road, I reasoned, we should reach pavement soon. As I drove, the fog seemed to recede a little, and the nauseating sense of temporal distortion lessened. My watch stayed at 11:59, but I no longer felt that oppressive feeling of being sealed in a nightmare. My shoulders eased, and I started to believe we would make it. I'd get Bandit to a vet, report the deaths of Amy Wallace and Darren Holloway, and then figure out how to live with what I'd done. Bandit laid his head on my lap, eyes half closed. I stroked his ears. "Almost there, boy." The tension in my voice was clear, but the worst seemed to be behind us. Then, just as I caught a glimpse of what looked like the main road, the car jolted hard, like we'd run over a log or a rock. I braked instinctively, heart pounding. Smoke or steam began pouring out from under the hood. The temperature gauge on the dashboard soared into the red. "No, no, no," I muttered, pulling off to the side, though there wasn't much of a shoulder to speak of. I popped the hood, let the engine cool for a second, then stepped out. The smell of burnt rubber assaulted my nose. In the swirling haze of the headlights, I saw coolant leaking. The radiator hose had burst, probably corroded by whatever the hell was in that bog water, or from just sheer misfortune. I fought back tears of frustration. We had been so close. I leaned over the engine, swearing, trying to see if I could patch it with duct tape or anything else. Nothing. The damage was too severe for a quick fix. That's when Bandit began barking frantically inside the car. I slammed the hood shut and rushed to the driver's side. My dog was snarling at something behind the Subaru. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it out the back window. For a second, I saw a pale face, eyes wide, mouth contorted in that same silent scream Amy had worn. Then it vanished. I swallowed hard, adrenaline spiking. The car was busted. We had no choice but to continue on foot. The road had to be close. If we followed it, we'd eventually reach a ranger station or a small town. Clutching the flashlight, and with Bandit hobbling beside me, I marched forward in the direction of the main road. The night air, or day air for all I knew, felt thick, but not as oppressive as in the bog. The forest on either side of the dirt track looked normal enough at first glance, though the silence was still unnerving. I tried to keep my mind focused on next steps. Find a phone signal, contact authorities, get help. The memory of Darren's final moments pressed into my thoughts like a knife, but I pushed it aside. If I dwelled on it too long, I'd break down. For about 20 minutes, I walked along the track. Then, I spotted a shape up ahead, something that looked man-made. As I drew closer, it revealed itself to be a battered sign. White paint flaked off the surface, but I could make out words. Cranberry Glades. Restricted area beyond this point, do not enter. Below it was a symbol I recognized as the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources. Relief washed over me. This was the same sign we'd passed on our way in, though it looked older, more weathered. Maybe I hadn't noticed all the details before. Beyond this sign should be the main road. I hurried forward, rounding a bend where the trees opened up, and found nothing, just more forest. The road ended abruptly, dissolving into gravel and then thick brush. I swiveled my flashlight around in confusion. Where was the paved road? We'd driven on a paved road to get here, but now it simply wasn't there. For a moment, I thought I must be disoriented, that the main road was a little further down. I pressed on another quarter-mile, weaving through old trees. That's when the path looped back on itself, depositing me at the exact same sign. I stared at it, at the peeling paint, at the chipped edges. My legs threatened to collapse beneath me. "Impossible," I whispered as Bandit whined. The faint sound of a woman's cry drifted through the woods. Not that shrill scream, but a soft, plaintive wail. My blood ran cold. Something rustled in the nearby bushes. A shape emerged, stumbling into the cone of my flashlight. It was a figure in a ranger's uniform, muddy and disheveled. Amy Wallace. She looked at me through hollow eyes. Her skin was ashen, lips cracked, one side of her face slack. But I recognized her. Shock and horror pinned me to the spot. She reached out a trembling hand, mouthing something. Her chest was stained with dark fluid. "Help me!" she croaked, but the words were slurred like a broken record. My brain screamed that this was impossible. Amy was dead. I checked her pulse. My heart battered my ribs as I stumbled backward. Bandit barked, then backed away too, tail between his legs. "Amy, I stammered, not knowing what else to say. She took a step forward, her foot dragging as though attached by threads. Her eyes rolled, focusing on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "You heard her scream," she whispered, voice barely above a rasp. "We all did." A gurgle cut off her words. Blood bubbled at her lips. She coughed, then let out that same ear-splitting wail that we'd heard in the night. My vision blurred. I turned to run, but my foot snagged on a root and I went sprawling. The flashlight flew from my hand, landing in a patch of grass and illuminating the scene at a weird angle. Amy, or whatever was using her body, advanced, arms outstretched. Bandit barked wildly, lunging at her. His teeth sank into her sleeve. She staggered, but didn't cry out in pain, didn't react like a living being. Instead, she swung her arm and hit Bandit with surprising force, sending him yelping into the dirt. Fury and fear collided in my chest. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed a thick branch, brandishing it like a weapon. "Stay back!" I shouted, though my voice trembled. "Stay the hell away!" She let out a low, guttural moan, staggering closer. The rational part of my mind had long fled. This was beyond anything I could explain or accept. When she lunged, I swung the branch with all my might, striking her shoulder. She stumbled but kept coming. I swung again, hitting her square in the jaw. The blow would have dropped an ordinary person. She barely flinched. Instead, she hissed, mouth contorting unnaturally, and grabbed at me with ice-cold fingers. In desperation, I reversed the makeshift club and drove the jagged end into her midsection. A wet sound came from her chest, and her eyes went wide. For a moment, something flickered behind them, like recognition or pain. She sagged, and I had to push her off me to keep her from toppling us both. She collapsed on the ground, mouth opening and closing silently. Dark liquid pooled around her, a sickly mixture of blood and something else. I watched, horrified, as her body began to dissolve into a sludgy mess like she was melting into the soil. Panicked, I grabbed the flashlight and ran, calling Bandit to follow. I ran until my legs burned, until I couldn't breathe. Bandit trotted beside me, limping but determined. At some point, the forest thinned, and I saw a faint glow of headlights. Real headlights, not my imagination. Heart hammering, I stumbled onto a real road, paved with a double yellow line. A jeep was parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. I collapsed near it, shouting for help. A man and a woman in casual hiking clothes emerged. They rushed to me, eyes wide. "Are you okay?" the woman asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at that, but it came out as a ragged sob. My words tumbled over each other. I must have sounded like a lunatic, talking about a banshee a friend possessed. A ranger's body. The couple exchanged worried looks. They offered me water, which I accepted greedily, only to realize I didn't even feel thirsty. Still, I gulped it down, needing something to ground me. They said they were just passing through, heading toward a small cabin they'd rented. They had no idea the road was supposed to be restricted. I told them everything, or at least a condensed version. They offered to drive me to the nearest town where we could call the authorities. I hesitated just long enough to glance at the endless trees behind me, half expecting a scream to echo. Nothing came. I helped Bandit into the back seat of their Jeep. They cranked up the heat and I sank into the seat, trembling. My heart pounded as we pulled onto the road and drove away, As I glanced out the rear window, I half expected to see Darren's silhouette in the mist, but there was only darkness. It took me days to piece together some semblance of an explanation. The authorities were skeptical. They found no body in the location I described. My Subaru was located near a dirt path, but it looked like it had been sitting there for months, maybe even a year, with a thick layer of mildew. The driver's seat was moldy, the tires flat. They concluded it had been abandoned a long time ago. That made no sense. I'd driven it there just days prior. Search parties combed the glades but found no sign of Amy Wallace or Darren Holloway. There was a missing persons report for a park ranger named Amy Wallace who had vanished 2 years earlier. But that only deepened the mystery. Darren, as far as I know, is still listed as missing. I've given statements, answered countless questions, even undergone a psych evaluation. None of it helped. I know what I saw. I'm home now, back in Pittsburgh, back to my spreadsheets and fluorescent lights. But I don't sleep well. Every night I dream of that circle of stones shaped like an eye, of green flames that refuse to stay lit, of rotting meat in my backpack. I see Darren's face twisting into that horrible grin. I hear the scream in the wind, cutting through me like a rusty blade. Bandit wakes me sometimes, whining softly, pawing at my door. He hasn't been the same since we got back. He's skittish, jumps at shadows. I don't blame him. I keep waiting for the nightmares to fade, but they only get stronger. Sometimes I wake up convinced I'm back in that bog, that my bedroom is just another illusion. The clock on my nightstand will read 11:59, the digital numbers flickering. Then, after I blink, it's 3:05 or 6:23 or some random time. Probably just a glitch. Probably. I've told my story to the local authorities, to friends, to anyone who will listen. Most assume I'm traumatized, that I fell down a ravine and hallucinated. But I know what happened. I can still smell that stench of decay, still feel Darren's too strong grip on my arms, still see Amy's face dissolving into that black sludge. Some nights, I think I hear the screech echoing through the alley outside my apartment. I jolt upright in bed, heart hammering, but only silence greets me. Still, I can't shake the sense that something followed me back, that maybe I didn't really leave. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see myself trudging through the bog, never reaching the car, never escaping. I guess I'll never know for sure. But if you're reading this, take my warning. If you ever find yourself drawn to the Cranberry Glades, if you ever feel that pull of curiosity, turn back. Don't listen for the scream. Don't chase your pride or your need to prove yourself. Some things in those woods are older than we can imagine, hungrier than we can fathom. They chose Darren. He was the first. Amy was long gone before I arrived, but they had her too, in some horrific fashion. They wanted me, and maybe they still do. In my worst nightmares, I picture my own body wandering those bogs, possessed by whatever malevolence rules that place. My name is Jake Grayson. I'm 30 years old, and this all happened in late October 2023. That's my truth. Believe it or don't. But remember, when the scream calls your name in the dead of night, pray you're not still there to hear it. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 28 years old. This happened in late October of 2023 at Spruce Knob, West Virginia. I wish I could explain everything that happened in a neat, logical manner, but I can't. Some of it still makes no sense to me. All I can do is tell you what I experienced and pray no one else goes through the same nightmare. I'm an investigative journalist for a small online magazine specializing in folklore and unsolved mysteries. I've always had a fascination with the supernatural, but part of me never really believed in it. I thought I was simply seeking scary stories to entertain readers, or maybe unearthing hidden truths about how legends start. Still, nothing prepared me for what I would witness on Spruce Knob. I decided to travel there because of an old story about a banshee named Moire. The local tales said people who heard her cry often disappeared without a trace. Some old newspaper clippings referenced footprints leading nowhere, or personal belongings found near the summit, but never any bodies. I've always been drawn to mysteries that linger unsolved, so I planned a 4-day hike to document these legends in detail. I wasn't alone. A good friend named Daniel Rhodes, Danny for short, volunteered to come. Danny is 31, a part-time wilderness guide, a pretty adventurous soul, and he's usually good company. He's also somewhat superstitious. He believed in the power of nature, in the spirits of the forest, though he always said it with a light-hearted grin. I suspect he came along more to make sure I didn't get into trouble than out of genuine curiosity. We also brought my German Shepherd, Baxter. He's 4 years old, loyal, well-trained, and big enough to help ward off coyotes or any stranger with bad intentions. We drove out to Spruce Knob on a crisp October morning. The leaves were in full blaze, red, orange, yellow, but as we climbed higher into the mountains, much of the foliage had already fallen. The sky looked bruised, heavy with clouds. I felt an odd pressure in the air as if something was pushing down on my chest, but I told myself it was just excitement. About 10 miles from our trailhead, we stopped at a small, run-down gas station. The pumps were ancient, the sign overhead missing letters. An older woman, probably in her 70s, stood behind the cash register staring at me and Danny like she'd been expecting us. She had thinning gray hair tied back with a piece of twine and wore a plaid shirt with sleeves rolled up to her elbows. I smiled, placed some snacks on the counter and said, "Morning." She looked from me to Danny and then down at Baxter, whose tail wagged politely. "What business you got up there?" she asked, voice so low I barely heard her. I was honest. I explained we were doing an article on the old legends of Spruce Knob, particularly the banshee myth. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Finally, she murmured, "Don't listen to her voice. If she calls your name, you're already dead." She said nothing else, just nodded once, took our money, and turned away. Outside, Danny chuckled nervously. "Local color," he said, but I could hear the unease behind his forced grin. We loaded back into the truck and headed off. We reached the trailhead by early afternoon. The forest was quiet except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. I felt a mild thrill. This was what I loved. The solitude, the crisp mountain air, the chance to disappear from the modern world for a while. We strapped on our backpacks, checked that our phones were fully charged, and started the hike. Baxter trotted happily beside us, occasionally sniffing at the undergrowth. The first day, everything went smoothly. We set up camp near a small clearing beneath towering spruce trees. The wind rustled the branches and a few crows cawed overhead. After a quick dinner of dehydrated meals, we lit a campfire. Baxter curled up at my feet, and Danny settled on a log across from me, reading the local folklore I'd printed out. According to one version of the legend, Moire was a woman who lost her family in a storm. She supposedly wandered the heights of Spruce Knob, wailing with grief, until she froze to death in the snow. Some said she was cursed to roam the woods forever, calling the names of those who trespassed on her domain. Others believed she was a banshee from the start, never human at all. Of course, there were no official records or credible evidence, just hearsay and tall tales. When I turned in that night, I felt oddly restless. The wind in the spruce boughs sounded like whispering voices. I told myself it was the natural hush of the forest, but I kept waking at every little noise. Once, I thought I heard a woman crying, far away. Another time, Baxter startled awake and growled at the tent wall, as if something or someone was outside. I peeked out with my flashlight but saw only darkness and swaying branches. Morning found me groggy but eager to move on. I wanted to explore more remote sections of the mountain, far from the typical tourist trails. After a quick breakfast, we packed up and hiked deeper into the wilderness. Baxter occasionally stopped and sniffed the air, ears perked but never barked. He just seemed vigilant. Around midday, we reached a rocky overlook offering a breathtaking view of the valleys below. The horizon was draped in gray clouds, swirling as if a storm approached. My phone still showed full battery. I made a mental note to take some photos for my article, but the instant I turned on the camera app, the phone screen flickered. Within seconds, it died completely. I tried turning it back on. Nothing. The battery icon flashed empty. Danny, noticing my frustration, checked his phone too. His was at 1%. A moment later, it blinked off. "Man, that's weird," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "I charged it in the truck." I nodded, feeling uneasy. Our phones had both been at full battery only a few hours ago. Granted, cell reception was spotty this high up, but the sudden drain felt unnatural. Danny shrugged, trying to brush it off. "We've got our maps and compass. Let's just keep going." We did. But by mid-afternoon, we noticed the compass was acting strange. The needle spun slowly, not locking onto north. Danny tapped its face, shook it gently, as if it might be jammed. It kept turning, as though we were standing in a powerful magnetic field. Baxter, usually excited to lead, began lagging behind, ears flat, tail low. He would stop, sniff the air, and whine. At one point, he even refused to keep walking until Danny coaxed him with treats. We had planned to reach a small clearing by late afternoon to set up camp again, but the trail markings didn't match our map. What should have been a well-maintained footpath had turned into an overgrown stretch of brambles and rotting logs. We must have gone a mile out of our way, twice, before Danny sighed and called for a break. "This is insane," I muttered, lowering my backpack to the ground. The route we were on didn't match anything in the guidebook. It was as if the forest was rearranging itself. I laughed at the notion, because that was ridiculous. But it also felt unsettlingly real. We pressed on until dusk. The forest was growing darker by the second, so we settled in a small clearing near a half-dead spruce. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness. Our attempts at building a fire started off normally, but at one point the flames flickered a bizarre shade of blue before returning to orange. Danny raised his eyebrows at me. "Probably some chemical in the deadwood," he joked weakly, but I could tell it shook him up. Dinner was silent, overshadowed by the day's strange events. We said little, just tried to enjoy the warmth of the fire. Baxter dozed at my feet, but I noticed his ears stayed upright, alert. That night, I slept restlessly again, nightmares plaguing me. In one dream, I heard my own voice calling for help in the distance. In another, I saw a woman's silhouette among the trees, her mouth open in a silent scream. When I finally jolted awake, it was near dawn, the sky barely starting to lighten. I reached for my sleeping bag zipper, only to find it already undone. My bag lay wide open as if someone had unzipped it from the inside while I slept. My heart thudded. "Danny?" I whispered. I turned on my flashlight and saw him still fast asleep across the small tent. His own sleeping bag was zipped up tight. Then I realized Baxter wasn't beside me. Panicked, I called his name. No response. I crawled out of the tent to find Baxter sitting just outside, ears pinned back, staring at the tree line. I tried to calm him, rubbing his neck. His muscles were rigid as if expecting an attack. The hair along his spine stood on end. He wouldn't take his eyes off the tree line, though I saw nothing there. Eventually, he followed me back inside, but he remained tense. I must have dozed off again, because by the time I woke for good, Danny had already stepped out of the tent. I scrambled out into the morning light. It was a cold, gray dawn. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the spruces. Danny was crouched by the fire pit, trying to coax another flame from last night's ashes. He glanced over his shoulder. "You sleep okay?" "Not really," I muttered. I told him about my sleeping bag being unzipped. He looked unsettled but chalked it up to me doing it in my sleep. I wasn't convinced. There was something about the absolute quiet of the night that wouldn't let me just forget. After a quick breakfast, we decided to move on. I still clung to the hope of filming or recording something for my article. If not the elusive banshee, then at least the weird occurrences we were experiencing. I had a small, digital voice recorder that still had battery life. I tested it. It seemed to be working fine. I turned it on, hoping to capture any odd sounds or voices as we walked. The day, however, was a nightmare of confusion. The map made no sense. Trails that should have taken us east seemed to curve west. Sometimes the forest looked familiar, as if we were circling back on our tracks, though we tried to follow fresh routes. Baxter grew increasingly anxious, whining whenever we approached certain groves of trees. By mid-afternoon, we were exhausted. The sun had vanished behind thick clouds, casting the mountain in dim, eerie light. We came upon what looked like a dried-up creek bed scattered with fallen branches. Danny said we could gather wood here for tonight's fire, then hopefully find a spot to camp nearby. He set down his pack and said, "I'll be back in a few minutes, okay? Just grabbing the best pieces." "I'll come with," I offered. He shook his head. "Stay here. You're probably as tired as I am. Baxter can keep you company." Before I could protest, he was off, climbing carefully over the fallen branches toward a cluster of tall spruces. Baxter watched him go but made no move to follow. Instead, my dog stayed rooted by my side, occasionally glancing up at me. We waited and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and there was no sign of Danny. I began to worry. Baxter whined. The wind picked up, swirling leaves around our feet. I fought the urge to call Danny's name. Somehow, the old woman's warning at the gas station echoed in my mind. If she calls your name, you're already dead. An irrational fear, but it rooted me to the spot. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Come on, Bax," I said, rummaging in my pack for a flashlight. It was still daytime, but the sky had grown gloomy enough to warrant it. We headed in the direction Danny had gone, stepping over the dry creek bed, up a slight rise, and into the line of trees. There, I found him, just standing. His back was to me, shoulders rigid. The wind whipped at his jacket. He faced a sheer drop-off maybe 20 yards away, beyond which lay a valley cloaked in mist. I let out a breath. "Danny," I said in relief. "God, you scared me. I've been waiting." He turned around slowly. The moment I saw his face, a cold wave of dread washed over me. He was smiling, but something about the expression was off, like the corners of his mouth were pulled too high. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He just stared at me. I swallowed, took a step closer. "Danny, are you okay?" He didn't speak at first. Then, in a voice that sounded stretched and empty, he said, "You're safe now, Sarah." It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, as if reciting lines from a script. Baxter let out a low growl and advanced a step, ears pinned. Danny's gaze flicked down to him. For the briefest moment, his lips curled back almost like an animal snarling. Then he just blinked and resumed that eerie smile. "What happened?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "Are you hurt?" Danny took a step toward me. "I'm fine," he said, voice flattening. "Let's go back to camp." The words were so monotone, so devoid of actual feeling that I could scarcely believe they came from him. Before I could move, Baxter leapt forward, barking madly. He lunged at Danny, teeth bared, biting his arm. But the reaction I expected, a cry of pain, a struggle, never came. Danny stood there, smiling that awful smile as Baxter's teeth sank into his jacket sleeve. I panicked. "Baxter, no!" I commanded, grabbing his collar and yanking him back. My dog released Danny, but as I pulled Baxter away, I noticed Danny's sleeve was shredded. I expected blood, at least some sign of injury. There was nothing, just the shredded fabric revealing pale skin beneath, unbroken but oddly discolored. I'm not even sure how to describe it. It looked almost translucent, like the flesh of a corpse left in the cold. I backed away, my pulse hammering. Fear gnawed at my stomach, telling me this is not Danny. I turned, half stumbling, dragging Baxter with me, and fled back to where we'd left our packs. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, methodical, like someone was following but not running. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the wind whipped around us. When I burst into the clearing, I whirled around, expecting to see Danny right behind me. He wasn't there. I stood panting, heart in my throat, while Baxter circled me, whining. We waited, maybe another 5 minutes. No sign of him. Finally, he appeared at the edge of the clearing, looking normal again. His jacket sleeve was intact, no sign of the rips or tears. He held several pieces of wood in his arms. "Hey," he said, tossing the wood onto the ground. "Why'd you run off?" His voice was steady, very much the Danny I knew. My body shook with adrenaline and confusion. You came back," I managed, stepping closer, carefully studying him. "You're not hurt?" He frowned. "Hurt? No, I just found some good firewood. You look like you've seen a ghost." I stared at him. Baxter whined again, sniffing at Danny's feet but not barking. My friend's expression was a mix of concern and mild annoyance. "Sarah, what's going on?" I couldn't bring myself to explain fully, so I just said, "You seemed different. I thought maybe you were lost." Danny shook his head, wearing a puzzled grin. "I'm fine, promise." He reached out to pat Baxter on the head, and Baxter allowed it, though my dog's posture remained cautious. I didn't know what to believe. Had I hallucinated the entire incident? Or was something messing with both of our heads? My intuition screamed that the man in front of me might not be entirely Danny. Still, we had no choice but to stay together. We were miles from civilization, lost on a mountain that didn't seem to follow normal rules. We walked another hour before finding a half-decent place to camp, an open space surrounded by thin pines. The wind had become bitterly cold, so we set up the tent and arranged a fire ring. As we tried to get a blaze going, the first attempt sputtered and died. We tried again with more tinder, only to watch it burn a deep red, almost purple, before dimming. On the third try, we managed to coax a proper flame. Night descended in a swirl of icy wind. Baxter nestled close to me, panting anxiously. Danny, on the other hand, seemed oddly calm, as if his earlier confusion was forgotten. He even whistled a tuneless melody while he heated a can of chili over the fire. While we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that time itself was warping around us. My watch said it was only 6:30 p.m., but the sky looked like midnight, and it felt like we'd been hiking far longer. We'd planned for a simple 4-day trip, but it already felt like weeks had passed. My stomach twisted. Something was very wrong about all of this. We turned in early, retreating into the shared tent. We zipped Baxter in with us, which we normally didn't do because he liked to guard the campsite. But my nerves were so on edge that I wanted him close. The wind outside howled, and the trees scratched at the nylon tent walls. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me. I woke in darkness, though my phone should have read the early hours of morning by then. Perhaps it did. My phone was still dead anyway. Baxter's muzzle rested on my stomach, but his eyes were open, staring at the tent flap. A soft hiss filled the air, almost like steam escaping a pipe, and then a low moan that sounded heartbreakingly human. Goosebumps prickled my arms. I gently nudged Danny, but he didn't stir. The moan came again, closer. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then a voice whispered, "Sarah," drawn out, as if carried by the wind. Baxter let out a trembling whine. I reached for the flashlight near my sleeping bag. But as soon as I flicked it on, I heard something scramble across the outside of the tent and the entire structure shook. Baxter shot up, snarling, pressing his nose against the fabric. My heart hammered. I switched the flashlight off, fear telling me that I didn't want to see whatever was out there. In the faint gloom, I realized Danny's sleeping bag was empty. He was gone. My stomach lurched. I had felt him next to me earlier in the night, so he must have slipped out recently, but why? I carefully unzipped the tent, forcing Baxter to stay behind, though he whined in protest. Outside, the moonlight filtered through the shifting clouds, illuminating the campsite in a ghostly glow. The fire had died down to faint embers. The wind whipped at my hair, and that moaning cry seemed to come from all around. Then I spotted Danny. He was standing on the far side of the dying fire, arms limp at his sides, head tilted toward the sky. I almost called his name, but the old woman's warning echoed in my mind. Instead, I crept around the perimeter of the campsite, approaching him from the side. When I was about 10 feet away, he slowly lowered his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were distant, unfocused. A tear tracked down his cheek, though his expression remained blank. I braced myself. "Danny?" I whispered, voice trembling. "What are you doing out here?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, a guttural sob escaped. It sounded like multiple voices merged into one, as though something was forcing itself through his throat. My eyes widened in horror. He reached a hand toward me, and the sleeve of his jacket slid up slightly. His forearm was raw, bloody, almost like the skin had been scraped away. I didn't see any fresh blood dripping, though. It looked half congealed, as if older than a few minutes. "Oh my God," I whispered, stepping closer despite my every instinct to run. He tried to speak again. This time, his voice came out stilted. "I'm cold." Then he collapsed to his knees, curling forward until his forehead touched the dirt. I rushed over, ignoring the dread pricking at the back of my mind. If there was some chance to help him, I had to try. I put a hand on his shoulder, only to recoil as a sickening squelch met my touch. Something under his jacket moved, like writhing shadows. I jerked back, nearly gagging. Suddenly, he snapped upright. His eyes were once again wide, blank, that awful smile returning to twist his features. His voice, higher now, almost feminine, whispered, "Found you." My scream caught in my throat. He lunged for me, moving with unnatural speed. His hands, cold as ice, closed around my wrists, and I felt him push me backward until my shoulders slammed into a fallen log. I managed to wrench free and scramble away. He came at me again, crawling in a jittery, unnatural way. Desperate, I grabbed a chunk of smoldering wood from the fire pit and swung it at him. Embers scattered, scorching small holes in the ground. The wood connected with his shoulder, and he hissed, a wet, rasping sound. I almost dropped the makeshift weapon, too horrified to think straight. But some survival instinct kept me pressing forward, jabbing the burning end at him to keep him away. He stared at me with fury, or maybe hunger. That's when Baxter flew out of the tent, barking and snarling, hurling his 80 pounds of muscle at Danny's back. They both tumbled over. I seized the chance to run toward my pack, which lay near a tree, rummaging for the hunting knife I always carried. By the time I turned back, Baxter was airborne, flung aside by a single, violent motion of Danny's arm. My dog crashed into a clump of bushes with a pained yelp. Something about that moment ignited pure rage in me. I rushed Danny as he crouched, ready to spring at me again. I thrust the knife forward, aiming for his chest, but he twisted. The blade went into his eye. A reeking black mist hissed out around the blade's entry point. He didn't scream. Instead, he let out a rattling laugh that made my skin crawl. He tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound came out. Desperation fueled me. I twisted the knife, and more of that inky vapor seeped out, dribbling like liquid shadow onto the ground. He jerked back, and for a split second, I saw something behind his eyes. Fear. Then his entire body convulsed. It was as if I'd cut the strings of a puppet. He collapsed in a heap, limbs contorting at sickening angles. A deep sigh escaped his lips, and the black vapor dissolved into the night air. Heart hammering, I crept forward. "Danny," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. His face still bore that horrible grin, but his eyes, one of them mangled, stared blankly at the sky. There was no breath, no heartbeat when I checked for a pulse. I slumped to my knees, a sob bursting from my chest. After a long moment, I heard Baxter whimper. I crawled over, found him lying in the bushes. He'd landed awkwardly, but nothing felt broken. His whining eased when I comforted him. I stroked his head, feeling hot tears slide down my cheeks. My mind reeled. The events of the past few hours felt impossible, nightmarish. A cold gust of wind rippled through the clearing, making the embers glow red. I looked at Danny's body again. I had to do something. Bury him? But the ground was too hard, rocky, and we were still lost. My only plan was to get out of the forest, get help, and let the authorities handle whatever this was. But first, I had to see if there was any sign of normalcy in him, any chance that my best friend was still inside. With shaking hands, I pulled at his jacket. The fabric felt damp, and the smell of decay hit me like a wall. Underneath, his skin was almost translucent in places, mottled with patches of rot. I gagged and fell back. Whatever had taken Danny, it had twisted his body into something that was rotting from the inside out. My chest felt tight. We had to leave now, but I also realized how deep we were in the wilderness, and how impossible it had been to follow the trails. The compasses were useless. The map might as well have been a blank sheet of paper. The phones were dead, even the spares. The sky threatened a storm. My only option, pick a direction and hope to find a road or sign for the main trail. I gathered what supplies I could: a flashlight, though its battery was nearly drained, some water, a bit of leftover food, and my voice recorder. I glanced at Danny's gear. Most of it looked wet or in disarray, like it had somehow rotted overnight. I took what was salvageable, forcing myself not to look at his face again. Then I left him there, his lifeless grin frozen in the firelight. Baxter whimpered at my side, but he rose, hobbling on a hind leg. "Come on, boy," I whispered, hugging him briefly. "We're leaving." The darkness clung to us as we trudged through the trees. My heart pounded with each step, half expecting Danny, or whatever that thing was, to leap out of the shadows. But we were alone. The wind carried faint moans and wails, or maybe it was just the branches scraping each other. I didn't want to know. I must have walked for hours. My watch said it was nearly 4 a.m., but time felt distorted, stretched into a shapeless void of fear and exhaustion. The forest refused to let me escape. Every path I took seemed to loop back on itself. Twice, I stumbled onto old footprints that I recognized as my own. Once, I found a clearing that looked exactly like the one where Danny had died, yet his body was nowhere in sight. I nearly vomited from the terror that rose in me then. Somehow, I pressed on. Baxter limped bravely at my side, ears constantly swiveling. At some point, I realized the sky was lightening, the sun beginning to rise. My watch, however, read 2:45 a.m. My brain screamed that something was wrong. It was 4 a.m. just minutes ago. I was too exhausted to make sense of it. Eventually, I emerged onto what looked like a rough dirt road. My heart soared with relief, though a dread still nagged at me. Roads meant potential rescue, so I followed it. Not long after, a truck appeared in the distance, a battered old pickup bouncing over the ruts. I flagged it down, tears of gratitude welling up. The driver, a man in his 50s with weathered skin and a heavy accent, eyed me and Baxter with concern. "Miss you all right? You look like you've been through hell," he said. I almost laughed, but instead I just nodded weakly. "Got lost," I managed. I decided not to mention Danny's death. Not now. The last thing I wanted was him thinking I was insane. "Could you take me somewhere with a phone?" He helped me into the passenger seat. Baxter hopped in back, whining softly. I had no idea what day or time it was anymore. I just wanted to call the police, get them to search for Danny's remains, find some official explanation. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew the man was gently shaking my shoulder, telling me we'd reached a small diner a few miles from the main highway. "You can use the payphone inside. Might want to clean yourself up, though. Your clothes are torn and you're covered in dirt." I stepped out of the truck. My ankles and knees screamed in pain. Baxter hopped down gingerly. The diner was a squat brick building with a flickering neon sign. I thanked the driver, who gave me a sympathetic nod, and pulled away. It was only then that I realized he never asked for money or any real explanation. Maybe I seemed too traumatized. Inside, a bell jingled over the door. The place was nearly empty, just one bleary-eyed waitress behind the counter. The smell of coffee and greasy bacon filled the air. I hurried to the payphone near the restrooms, rummaged in my pocket for change. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the coins twice before slotting them in. I called 911. My voice trembled as I tried to explain about the missing friend, about where we'd been. The dispatcher, calm but slightly patronizing, promised they would send someone to check. She asked me to stay on the line, but the phone cut off with a harsh static. I jiggled the receiver, but it was dead. In frustration, I slammed it against the cradle. When I turned around, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the diner's glass front. I looked feral, my dark hair tangled, dirt smudged across my face, eyes wide with fear. But that's not what made me nearly drop to my knees. For a moment, a single, horrifying second, I saw Danny standing behind me in that reflection, his grin wide, black mist seeping from the knife wound in his eye. I spun around, screaming. There was no one there, just an empty booth, stained vinyl seats. My breathing came ragged and fast, and Baxter whimpered at my side. The waitress hurried over, asking if I was okay. I couldn't find the words. I just shook my head, tears rolling down my cheeks. She took pity on me, offered me water, let me borrow the diner's phone to try 911 again. I told them everything a second time. This time, the line stayed connected. They said they'd dispatch a local officer to the diner so I could give a statement in person. Minutes felt like hours. The waitress, her name tag read Helen, placed a mug of coffee in front of me. On the house," she said softly, eyes flicking to the door. She kept giving me worried looks, as if she expected me to collapse. Eventually, a police cruiser pulled up, headlights cutting through the early morning light. A deputy stepped out, a tall, tired-looking man in his 40s, and made his way inside. I tried my best to explain our route, about Danny going missing, my attempt to escape. He wrote notes in a small pad, frowning deeper each time I mentioned the strange events. "You said he attacked you," he clarified, glancing at the tear in my jacket, the bruises on my wrists. "Yes," I whispered, voice shaking. "But there's more. This wasn't just a normal—" He raised a hand, politely but firmly cutting me off. "I understand, Ms. Whitmore. We'll send a search party up that way. Why don't you let the paramedics check you out?" I nodded. I knew how I must sound. A half-crazed woman claiming her friend was possessed in the woods. There was no point arguing. The important thing was that they'd look for Danny's remains. Maybe they'd find some logical explanation. A rabid animal, poisonous plant leading to hallucinations, something, anything. An ambulance arrived shortly after. A paramedic looked me over while another gave Baxter a cursory check, verifying he didn't have broken bones. They offered to drive me to the local hospital to treat my scrapes and shock. I agreed, staring out the window at the emerging daylight as we pulled away. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread, like I was safe now, but also irrevocably changed. The hospital visit was a blur. They took some blood, checked my vitals, asked endless questions. I just repeated that my friend was lost in the woods, that we'd gotten separated. Eventually, the police came back with more questions, but no news. They said they'd keep searching. A storm was due that afternoon, which would hamper any rescue efforts. I started to cry again, imagining Danny's body left out there in the cold, or worse, never found. The hours dragged on. The staff finally let me go, telling me I needed rest. Helen, the diner waitress, surprisingly showed up, having closed her shift. She offered me a place to stay for the night in a small guest room at her house. I was reluctant at first, but she insisted, and I had nowhere else to go. My editor had no idea what had happened, and I wasn't in any shape to drive the hours back to my apartment. That evening, Helen prepared a modest dinner. Baxter lay at my feet, occasionally lifting his head at the slightest noise. She asked if I wanted to talk about it, but I just shook my head. I had no words left. When night came, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Danny's contorted grin, heard that rattling laugh. I was sure I heard my name whispered in the wind outside the window. Exhaustion finally pulled me under in the early hours of the morning. My dreams were a swirling montage of laughter, screams, and whispering voices. When I jolted awake, the bedside clock read 7 o'clock a.m., but I glanced at my watch to find it was stuck at 3:12 a.m. My phone, which I'd tried charging, displayed the correct time, but the battery icon was full one moment, then dead the next. The sense of unreality persisted, even here. Helen knocked softly at the door. "Morning, hun. Coffee's on," she said, voice gentle. I forced a smile, got dressed, and joined her in the kitchen. My body ached, every muscle reminding me of the horrors I'd endured. She asked if I felt up to calling the police for an update, so I did. They said the search was ongoing but hadn't found anything. No trace of Danny, no sign of foul play, no remains. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I recalled the clearing where I'd left him. Could it be that the body was somehow gone? Or had I gotten the location so confused by the twisted trails that I'd never be able to give them an accurate map reference? Months later, I still have no answers. I never wrote the article. The nightmares have lessened but never fully stopped. Sometimes, when Baxter and I go on our evening walks, I catch him staring into the shadows like he sees something I can't. And late at night, if the wind is right, I think I hear Danny's voice call my name. It always sounds faint, like a memory floating on the breeze. Sarah, you can believe me or not. I don't expect anyone to take my words at face value. But if you ever find yourself drawn to Spruce Knob in search of ghost stories, or chasing the legend of a banshee named Moire, remember my warning. If you hear her voice in the wind, do not answer. If your friend goes missing and comes back different, run. And if you feel the forest warping around you, if time itself seems to bend, turn back. Because once the mountain has you in its grasp, you might not come out the same, or at all. My name is Jack Mercer. I was 42 years old when this happened. In August of 2023, I wish I could say it was just a nightmare. One conjured by too many lonely nights or too much cheap whiskey. But I know what I saw. I know what nearly took me. And I can't forget the faces of those who weren't so lucky. I'm writing this from a cramped motel room in Asheville, North Carolina, trying to piece together the events of a week that shattered my understanding of reality. If my story can keep someone else from making the same mistakes, then maybe I can sleep at night again. I'd been living on the road for about 3 months, traveling in an old RV I bought after my divorce. I'm a travel writer by trade, though disillusioned might be a better word for it. The constant deadlines, the always-on-call hustle, the impossible demand for ever more exotic content, it wore me down. After the breakup, I grabbed my laptop, stuffed some clothes into a duffel, and moved into an RV with a leaky roof. I spent my days hopping between free boondocking sites and cheap national forest campsites, writing pieces about hidden America for a niche blog that paid me just enough to fill my gas tank and keep me fed. That's what led me to Pisgah National Forest, near Black Mountain, North Carolina. This region is peppered with stories of old ghost towns and vanished logging camps from decades past. Rumors of entire settlements that sprang up for a short time, gold or lumber or some fleeting resource, only to wither away. Some say these settlements never truly existed, or if they did, no official records remain. I wanted to see for myself, snap some pictures, maybe track down a local hermit for an interview. A story like that, if written well, might net me a decent check and a bit of recognition. So, in the last week of August, I turned off the highway, wound my way up a narrow gravel road, and found a small clearing that served as a free campsite. It was remote, just the way I liked it, and gave me the perfect vantage to explore the deeper pockets of Pisgah. I arrived early in the afternoon. The place was beautiful, in a quiet, unsettling way. Thick forest on all sides, a backdrop of rolling hills, and a sky that seemed permanently draped in low-hanging clouds. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. I parked my RV in the clearing, leveled it on some chocks, and hopped out to stretch my legs. I'm not a superstitious man, but from the moment I stepped onto that ground, something felt off. The woods were silent in a way that made my ears strain, like they were looking for sound that wasn't there. Every so often, I'd catch a distant rustling, only to realize it was the wind shifting leaves. But there was something else, too, a sense that the forest was holding its breath. I tried to ignore it. After all, isolation was the point. As I set up camp, unrolling my awning, arranging my portable table and chair, I noticed an old truck parked further down the clearing, barely visible behind some trees. It looked like it had been there a while, rust creeping up its sides. I shrugged, figuring someone might have left a junker behind or come in a second vehicle and hiked out. Didn't seem like my business. I settled in for a quiet evening, intending to do some preliminary writing. I got as far as a blank page before a voice startled me. "Evenin', stranger." The man's voice was raspy, carrying a hint of local accent. I turned around, nearly dropping my laptop. Standing by the edge of my little campsite was a tall figure, maybe in his mid-50s, with a bushy gray beard and eyes that flicked around restlessly, as though searching for threats. He wore a faded flannel shirt and a battered cap. He was lean, almost gaunt, like the woods themselves had shaped him. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said. I inhaled a shaky breath. "It's okay," I managed. "Didn't hear you come up. I'm Jack Mercer." He tipped his cap in a nod. "Elias Harper. Didn't expect to see anyone out here. Not many folks come to this corner unless they're lost or looking for trouble." I explained that I was a travel writer researching ghost towns. He eyed me with something like pity. "You're not the first to come chasing after old stories in these mountains. Most folks don't stay long, though. Some places they ain't meant for us." "Meant for us?" I echoed, half grinning. "I've been to a lot of spooky spots. I can handle it." He didn't laugh. Instead, he gazed past me into the tree line, as if he expected something to appear. "If you see anything at night, best you don't look too long. And if you hear anything, don't listen. The mind can play games in these parts." I gave him a polite nod and tried to hide my unease. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." Elias shifted from foot to foot, then muttered, "This place, it has a way of keeping what it wants. If you got any sense, you'll clear out before dark." I started to ask him to clarify, but he just gave me a curt nod and turned, walking back into the woods. Within seconds, he was gone, like he'd melted into the foliage. I felt a chill that wasn't from the mountain air. Maybe the old-timer was just trying to scare me off, or maybe he really believed there was something in these woods. I shrugged it off. If I ran every time someone told me ghost stories, I'd never have an article to sell. Night crept up on me faster than I expected. By 7, the sky was already losing light. I decided to cook a quick meal inside the RV and read a bit. When I stepped out to dump my dishwater, the woods seemed transformed. An endless black void, swallowing the silhouettes of trees. Every small noise made me jump. Leaves rustling, a twig snapping. Normal forest sounds, but they felt amplified by the absolute darkness. I retreated into the RV and locked the door. I'm not usually that paranoid, but Elias's warning gnawed at my nerves. Lying in bed, I tried to scroll social media on my phone, but the service was nearly non-existent. I tossed the phone aside and forced my eyes shut. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke to whispers circling the RV. At first, I thought it was the wind, but after a few minutes of listening, I realized it sounded like multiple voices, hushed and urgent. I leaned up in my bunk, heart pounding. The windows were shut, but it felt like those voices were seeping through the seams of the RV. For a moment, I considered going outside to check, but my stomach churned with fear. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight, clicked it on, and peered through the window. I saw nothing but dense fog swirling in the clearing. The moon was a faint glow behind the clouds, barely illuminating a few feet beyond the RV. No sign of footprints or people. The whispers, though, they persisted, rising and falling in patterns I couldn't understand. I tried to tell myself it had to be wind in the pines or maybe distant water, but it felt too rhythmic, too human. Eventually, I decided the best course of action was to put on some music through my headphones and try to block it out. After an hour or so, exhaustion won. I drifted back into a fitful sleep. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was cutting through the clouds, and everything seemed normal again, peaceful even. I almost convinced myself the whispers had been a dream. I had a quick breakfast and brewed some coffee. Then I decided to explore. I wanted to find any remnants of the rumored settlement or ghost town. If I was going to write an article, I needed photos, interviews, and maybe some local lore. Plus, if I hiked around, maybe I'd find Elias again. Despite his cryptic words, he might have real knowledge of the area's history. I set off on foot, following a narrow, overgrown trail that branched from the clearing. I carried a small day pack, water, snacks, first aid, a camera, my phone for GPS, though the signal was weak, and a folding knife just in case. The forest was lush, but eerily silent. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. My footsteps felt deafening on the soft ground. Every so often a breeze would lift the mist, revealing shapes far ahead. Then it would settle again, hiding the world. After maybe an hour, I spotted something unnatural in the foliage, a shape with straight edges. As I drew closer, I realized it was an old, dilapidated RV. It looked like it had been parked there for years. Rust consumed its sides, vines crawled over its roof, and one of the windows was shattered. A musty, decaying smell lingered in the humid air. My heart thumped a bit faster. This was more than a random eyesore. Maybe I'd find clues or items that could help date the site. I peeked inside. The door hung crookedly, revealing a dark interior. Furniture was toppled, rotting. In the tiny kitchenette, mold covered an array of half-eaten canned goods long expired. Then I noticed a notebook on what was left of the dining table. Carefully, I flipped it open. It was water-damaged, but still legible in places. The last entries chilled me. Saw them again tonight, standing in the fog. They have no faces. I think they're waiting for me to listen. If I see them again, I'll go mad. I know I will. I skimmed a few earlier pages. The writer described hearing voices in the woods, hearing them outside at night. He claimed they whispered nonsense, but sometimes repeated fragments of his own sentences. My stomach tightened. It felt too similar to my own experience with the whispering. The final scrawled line read, "They're so close. They know I can hear them. I don't think I was supposed to see them." I dropped the notebook, heart hammering. This was the kind of thing that'd make for a great story, if it wasn't so terrifyingly real. I stepped out, inhaling fresh air to fight off the claustrophobia that had settled in my chest. What happened to the person who wrote that? The RV looked like it had been abandoned for at least a year or two, maybe more. But the way the entry was scribbled suggested panic, not a peaceful departure. Feeling uneasy, I trudged back toward my campsite. My mind churned with possibilities. Was it just the rantings of someone with mental health issues? Or was there truly something out here? I thought of Elias, his warning to leave before dark. Maybe I should. But leaving meant giving up on my story and also giving in to fear. I was torn. My instincts told me to get the hell out, but my stubbornness insisted on staying, if only for a little while longer to see if there was more to uncover. Besides, I'd just gotten here. When I reached my RV, I wasn't alone. There was another RV parked about 30 yards away, newer, in decent shape. The occupant was outside, rummaging in a storage compartment. It was a woman, early 30s, with shoulder-length dark hair tied back. She wore hiking pants and a gray t-shirt, her body language screaming tension. She noticed me and waved tentatively. "Hey," she called, voice echoing in the still air. I was starting to think I was all alone out here. I walked over, relieved to see another human being. "Yeah, it's kind of empty," I said, smiling. "Jack Mercer." She returned the smile, but it was thin, more polite than happy. "Madeline Kane. Most people call me Maddie." We chatted for a moment, exchanging pleasantries. She said she'd been camping in the region for a few days, exploring different forest roads. Then her expression turned serious. Have you noticed anything strange at night?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "Strange how?" She let out a breath. I've heard things. Whispers, maybe. And last night, she glanced away as if embarrassed. I swear, I saw people outside my RV just standing there in the fog. When I shined my flashlight, they disappeared. A chill wound its way up my spine. Her words echoed what I'd read in that notebook. I told her haltingly about the whispers around my RV. I left out the part about the abandoned camper for now. No need to overwhelm her. She seemed relieved that I'd experienced something similar. At least, I'm not imagining it, she said, crossing her arms. I was this close to packing up and leaving, but I haven't seen another camping spot that doesn't involve a 2-hour drive in the dark, and my phone's dead half the time. I glanced at her rig. Does everything still work? Battery, generator, that sort of thing? She nodded. Mostly. My phone charger's glitchy. I was going to try and get some photos of the area, but it keeps draining my phone. Figured I'd leave tomorrow morning, bright and early. We looked at each other, a mutual understanding passing between us. We were uneasy, but not quite panicked enough to drive off in the middle of the day. Part of me was grateful for her company. Strength in numbers, right? I invited her over to my campsite for a chat and a cup of coffee. She agreed, and soon we were seated at my folding table. As we talked, I noticed how frequently her eyes darted to the tree line. She mentioned seeing shapes in the corners of her vision, shapes she wasn't sure were animals or people. She also mentioned that something had pounded on her RV door the previous night, just once, followed by rustling outside. When she opened the door, there was only fog. It was unnerving to realize we shared such similar experiences. By mid-afternoon, we agreed to keep an eye out for each other overnight. Maybe we could figure out who or what was prowling around. I told her about the local man, Elias, who had warned me. She'd never heard of him, but she didn't dismiss the idea that an eccentric hermit might be lurking. We reasoned it could even be a living person messing with us. Someone who'd read about local legends and wanted to spook campers. That evening, we tried to build a campfire between our RVs, more for morale than warmth. The sun faded quickly behind the mountains, leaving us in a dim, gray twilight. We sat on foldable chairs, sipping instant soup from mugs. The fire spat and crackled, but no matter how much kindling I added, it never seemed to burn bright. Smoke drifted into the sky, pale and wispy, blending with the fog. As night deepened, the wind dropped to nothing. It was like the air turned thick, pressing on our ears. The forest around us sank into a silence so profound it felt oppressive. We whispered to each other about random topics to keep ourselves calm, travel stories, places we'd been, how we ended up here. But both of us kept glancing into the darkness. It started as a gentle tapping on a tree trunk, somewhere to our left. Then a scrape against bark. Maddie grabbed her flashlight and aimed it. Nothing. We waited, breath caught in our throats. The tapping resumed, now from the opposite side of the clearing. Animals, maybe, I muttered, though my voice shook. Could be a raccoon or something. Maddie's flashlight found only swirling fog. Raccoons don't usually tap, she said grimly. Then we heard a low chuckle. It sounded almost human, but was too hollow, too echoing. A shape flickered at the edge of our firelight. Maddie gasped, and I lunged for my own flashlight. By the time I aimed it, the shape was gone. The forest was empty, the tapping ceased, replaced by a hush that made my heart hammer. We retreated to our respective RVs, deciding it was safer to lock ourselves in until daylight. But we exchanged phone numbers, service permitting, and promised to text if anything happened. "Stay safe," she whispered, before closing her door. I nodded and did the same. Hours passed in a slow, tense vigil. I tried to watch a downloaded movie on my laptop, but every minute or two I paused it, thinking I heard footsteps in the gravel. Sometimes I did. Sometimes it was just the trailer settling or the wind picking up. My nerves were frayed. At one point, around midnight, I swear I saw movement outside the RV's window. A flash of a white face, featureless, but the length of a breath later it was gone. I must have dozed off because I woke to frantic pounding on my door. My phone read 2:46 a.m. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I scrambled out of bed, flipped on the overhead light, and approached the door with trembling hands. "It's me," Maddie's muffled voice called. I looked through the peephole. Sure enough, she stood there, eyes wide in terror. I unlocked the door, letting her in. She was dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie, hair disheveled. Something, came to my RV, she breathed. It knocked, or maybe it was scratching. I turned on my exterior lights and saw outlines like 4 or 5 tall figures. They didn't move, just stared. So I called out, asking who they were. Her eyes glistened with fear. They scattered, melted away in the fog. I didn't know what else to do. I got scared. My stomach churned. The memory of that abandoned RV's notebook flashed through my mind. Faceless people in the fog. "You can stay here for the rest of the night," I said. "We'll figure it out at dawn." She nodded, shivering despite the warmth in my rig. We turned off all the lights except a small lamp and hunkered down together, listening to every creak. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I heard a faint knock on the back of the RV. We froze. Another knock, slow and deliberate. We held our breath. The knock came again, a hollow sound echoing through the small space. Then silence. I glanced at Maddie, her face pale. Neither of us dared open the door to see what might be out there. Eventually, the heaviness of exhaustion took over, and we slumped into a light, fitful sleep. At first light, if you could even call it that in the gray gloom, we decided to leave immediately. Our plan was to pack up and caravan out of the forest. No more research, no more ghost hunts. Just the safety of a paved road. We threw our belongings together, stuffed them in our RVs, and within an hour, both engines were idling, ready to go. That's when we discovered the road out had changed. I can't explain it better than that. We drove for half an hour, following the gravel route that should have taken us straight to a connecting forest highway. Instead, it looped us back to the same damned clearing where we started. My eyes widened in disbelief as I recognized the rusted truck near the trees. Maddie's RV pulled up behind me, and she got out, looking shaken. "This can't be right," she said, her voice trembling. "We took the same route we came in on. It was a straight shot." I could only shake my head. "I know. Let's try a different direction." We studied the map I'd downloaded on my phone, but the GPS was useless. No signal, or it kept glitching. So we guessed, picking another forest road that branched off from the clearing. We followed it for over an hour, up steep inclines, past stands of pine and dead log piles. Eventually it widened and then curved, leading us right back to the same spot again. I felt a rising panic. The forest was labyrinthine, but this was impossible. We should have come out somewhere on the main road. Instead, it was like we were trapped in a bubble. Maddie's hands shook on her steering wheel. I could see tears in her eyes as she realized we weren't simply getting turned around. Something else was happening. Something bigger than bad directions. We decided to park again, regroup, and double-check the map. That's when Elias Harper appeared. He stepped out of the trees, same flannel shirt and cap, but something about his posture was off. He stood too straight, his eyes too wide. My skin prickled. Maddie clutched my arm as he approached. "You folks shouldn't have stayed," he said, voice oddly flat. My heart pounded. "Elias, look. We're trying to leave, but the roads aren't making sense." He stared at me with that unsettling gaze. then flicked his eyes to Maddie. "You saw them, didn't you?" She didn't respond, and he smiled, a thin, humorless smile. "They'll take what they can get, but they're patient. If you let them speak to you, if you listen too long, they'll find their way in." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, though a part of me feared the answer. He lifted a hand, pointing at the fog. "They're hollow ones. Not from here, not from anywhere. They feed on what you are, leave behind an empty shell." He took a step toward us. "Best you accept it. There's no leaving." A chill clamped around my heart. I studied him closer. His face looked incomplete. I hadn't noticed it in the dim light before, but now, in the gray morning, it was as if the angles of his jaw and cheeks were softly blurred. His eyes were unfocused, like a poorly replicated photograph of a man rather than the real thing. Maddie gasped, tugging me back. "Jack, look at his face." I stepped away, adrenaline spiking. "You're not Elias," I whispered. He opened his mouth in a silent laugh, revealing teeth that appeared smudged or faint, as though drawn in pencil. My head spun with disbelief. Then he raised one arm, bending it at an impossible angle. Maddie screamed, stumbling backward. I pulled her toward my RV. "Get inside," I shouted. We scrambled into the cab, slamming and locking the door. My hands shook on the ignition, but the engine caught. I glanced out the windshield in time to see Elias striding closer, his body flickering in the swirling fog. Without thinking, I gunned the engine, swerving around him, and roared onto the forest road. Maddie followed in her own RV, headlights flashing as she tried to keep up. I didn't have a plan, I just drove, the road ruts jostling us, branches scraping the sides of the vehicle. For minutes, we pressed on, sweat dripping down my temple as I fought the steering wheel. Ahead, the forest parted. Relief surged in me. Maybe we'd finally broken free, but instead, we found ourselves in a place neither of us had seen before. A row of dilapidated wooden buildings stood in the clearing, leaning at odd angles. Some had roofs partially caved in. Others were missing entire walls. It looked like an unfinished town that time forgot. My foot eased off the gas instinctively. "Is that a ghost town?" Maddie breathed, voice cracking through the walkie-talkie we'd found in my RV. I realized I must have left it on earlier. Good, we could communicate. I slowed to a stop, peering through the windshield. This had to be one of those rumored settlements. But it felt wrong, as if the buildings weren't entirely real. The boards seemed too clean in places, too rotten in others, all contradictory. My heart thudded in my chest. We parked side by side, engines idling. "What do we do?" Maddie asked. "Turn around?" I swallowed hard. The road behind us disappeared into thick fog, and my gut said if we tried to backtrack we might just land here again. "Let's look around," I said, though my own words terrified me. "Maybe we can find answers, or see if there's another road out." She hesitated, then nodded, stepping out of her RV. I followed. The air felt stagnant, like an abandoned tomb. No birds, no wind, just our footsteps crunching gravel and the heavy thump of our hearts. The main structure was a large, two-story building that might have been a hotel or boarding house once. A broken sign dangled from a rusted chain, its letters worn away. In the gloom, the building's windows looked like eyes. The door hung ajar, groaning on its hinges. With our flashlights, we entered. The floorboards creaked underfoot, a layer of dust swirling in the beams of light. Faint shapes of furniture lined the walls, chairs, tables, all half-formed, or maybe half-rotted. Some corners looked incomplete, as if the wood had never been fully carved. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. It was as though reality in this place was half-finished. Maddie gasped, pointing. A mirror hung on the far wall, or at least it resembled a mirror, tarnished glass in an ornate, peeling frame. Our reflections stared back, but something was off. My mirror image was slightly out of sync, moving a fraction of a second behind me. I raised my flashlight and the reflection lagged. My stomach did a backflip. "What the hell?" Maddie whispered. Then her reflection turned its head to look at her, although she hadn't moved. A prickle of dread washed over me. "Don't look," I hissed, grabbing her arm and tugging her away. I remembered Elias's, or the Hollow One's, warning. If you let them speak, if you watch them too long, they find their way in. I wanted no part of that. We fled the building, stumbling onto the dirt road that cut through the ghost town. More structures loomed: a collapsed church, a store with shelves of unrecognizable items, a row of half-built shacks. But no people, living or otherwise. Not even the illusions of them. Only the crushing sense that we were trespassing on ground never meant for us. A scream tore through the silence. Maddie's. I whirled around to see one of them. A figure, elongated, impossibly tall. Its face was a swirl of pale flesh, no eyes, no features. Just the suggestion of a nose and mouth. It stood between us and our RVs, blocking the path. My blood iced over. Its arms bent at unnatural angles, like a puppet with twisted strings. I fumbled for the folding knife in my pocket, though I doubted it would do much good. The creature raised a hand, beckoning in a slow, disjointed motion, almost as if mocking us. Then its mouth, or where its mouth should be, opened in a silent shout. My ears rang, though there was no sound. Maddie stumbled backward, breathing in sharp, panicked gasps. Behind the creature, more shapes emerged, drifting through the haze. They were all wrong. Unfinished faces, elongated limbs, some crawling, others lurching upright. My heart hammered like it wanted out of my chest. We were surrounded. "Run!" I screamed, seizing Maddie's hand. We sprinted between two of the sagging buildings, dodging warped support beams. The ground underfoot felt muddy and the air thick. The Hollow Ones gave chase, but in a manner that felt more like floating than running, flickering in and out of the fog. The more we ran, the more the world twisted. Doors led to the same rooms, alleys circled back. Time might as well have been meaningless. We burst into a small courtyard behind the church. A scattering of broken pews rotted in the open air. At the far side of the courtyard loomed another building, half sunken into the earth. A battered sign jutted out, carved with shapes I couldn't decipher. The door was wide open, revealing blackness. Trapped in a labyrinth, we had no better choice. We dashed inside. The hallway was narrow, the walls flaking plaster. Our flashlights flickered. I heard a buzzing in my ears, and the air smelled of mildew and rotten eggs. At the end of the hall was another mirror. I tried not to look at it, but my peripheral vision caught glimpses. My reflection was there, but it twitched unnaturally. Maddie's reflection was similarly delayed, until it wasn't. Then it moved faster, then slower again. The mirror started to speak, though neither of us moved our lips. It repeated a garbled echo of Maddie's scream, then snatches of the warnings Elias had spoken. A mishmash of words from my memory. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart racing. "We have to break it," I gasped. "Maybe that severs whatever hold they have." I heard Maddie whimper. When I opened my eyes, she was staring at the mirror, transfixed. Her lips parted, tears glimmering on her cheeks. She mouthed the word, "help." But her reflection stared back with an eerie calm, its mouth curving into a grin. She took a trembling step closer. Panicking, I snatched a broken piece of wood from the floor and swung it as hard as I could. The mirror shattered, shards raining down on the rotted floorboards. The reflection tore into fragments, each piece warping and swirling with blackness. For a split second, I thought I saw multiple versions of our faces screaming from each shard. Then it was gone. A high-pitched wail tore through the corridor, echoing. Dust and debris shook from the ceiling. I grabbed Maddie's wrist, half dragging her toward what I hoped was an exit. She stumbled, head lolling. "Jack," she murmured, as though in a daze. "Stay with me," I pleaded, fear spiking my veins. We barreled down the corridor, the walls blurring in my peripheral vision. I heard that wailing behind us, multiplying into a chorus of unnatural voices. The building spat us out into an alley filled with swirling fog. There, looming just beyond, were our RVs. I didn't question how they'd appeared so close. Maybe we'd circled around, maybe reality was fraying. I only knew we had to get inside, had to drive until the illusions left us alone. We made a dash for it, ignoring the shapes that flickered in the fog. My breath burned in my lungs. Maddie broke from my grip, throwing herself into the driver's seat of her RV. I dove into mine, cranked the ignition, and slammed it into gear. The engine roared, wheels spinning on the soft ground. Then I lurched forward, ramming through the twisted remains of an old fence. Maddie followed close behind, headlights illuminating the swirling white mist. For a while, it was all I could do to keep my eyes on the road, or what passed for a road. The shapes flitted on either side. I heard scraping along the RV's walls, saw flickers of pale arms out of the corners of my eyes. I pressed the gas harder, praying the road would straighten out, lead us somewhere, anywhere, beyond this cursed town. Suddenly, the fog thinned, giving way to a dirt track. My heart pounded with cautious hope. I kept going, not stopping for a second. The track wound around a bend, up a gentle slope, then descended into a valley. The shapes receded behind the trees, or perhaps they were never there. All at once, the sunlight brightened, and the sky took on a clearer blue tinge. My dashboard clock read 2:10 p.m., though I'd have sworn it was later, or earlier. My sense of time was destroyed. Maddie's RV was still in my rearview, thankfully. She flashed her headlights twice. We continued together for another few miles, the dirt track gradually smoothing out until, finally, we emerged onto an actual paved road. I let out a cry of relief that turned into a sob. I pulled over onto the shoulder, needing to breathe. Maddie parked behind me. She staggered out, meeting me at the driver's side window. We looked at each other, eyes wild. Words failed us for a long moment. Then she began to weep. I climbed out and hugged her, tears burning my own eyes. We'd made it. I didn't know how or why, but somehow, we'd escaped the labyrinthine horror that had gripped us. In a daze, we continued driving together, eventually finding a rural gas station with a phone signal. Maddie called her sister, sobbing into the phone, something about needing help and not knowing what just happened. I called a friend in Asheville, told him I'd be back in town soon, asked if I could crash at his place. My voice shook so badly, I doubt he understood half of what I said, but he got the gist. We parted ways in Asheville. She was heading west, wanted to leave the region entirely. I couldn't blame her. We exchanged contact info, though I don't know if she'll ever pick up my calls. Maybe she's doing what I'm doing, trying to pretend life can return to normal, but waking up every night to the echo of strange voices, scanning every mirror to make sure the reflection matches. I tried going to the authorities. They found my story incredulous, of course. They asked if I'd been drinking, if I might have become disoriented in the woods. No bodies, no immediate evidence, just my battered RV with strange scratches and dents. I even tried telling them about the old ghost town, offering coordinates best as I could recall. A search party claimed they didn't find anything matching my description. Just standard forest roads, a few old homesteads. They chalked it up to stress, mania, or hallucinations. But I know the truth. Maddie does too. My GPS logs show hours of missing time, bizarre location pings that jump around the forest. Part of me wonders if we broke through some barrier that wasn't meant to be broken. Another part worries that the barrier remains thin, that if I wandered too far off the main roads again, I might slip back into that half-formed world. Or maybe it might come to me. For weeks, I dreamed of them. The hollow ones. So quiet. So watchful. In the dreams, their faces are blank canvases, but their eyes are mirrors, reflecting me. Sometimes I see Elias among them. Sometimes I see the reflection I shattered, pieced back together in a jigsaw of glass. No matter what I do, the dream always ends with me floating in the fog, my face melting away to reveal emptiness beneath. They say trauma fades over time, but I'm not sure this kind of horror ever does. I've tried rationalizing, searching for logical explanations. Illusions caused by toxic gas or mass hysteria. But late at night, when my reflection moves just a fraction of a second too slow, I remember that building, that mirror, those half-formed faces. I remember the repeated words of that abandoned notebook. They know I can hear them. I don't think I was supposed to see them. I've heard of other travelers going missing in the Pisgah region. Usually, folks assume they got lost or had an accident. But in my gut, I suspect some of them stumbled across that place, whatever it is, and never found their way out. Or worse, they came back with hollow eyes and incomplete faces, passing through the woods like phantoms. I'm not writing this to scare you away from the Appalachian wilderness. There's grandeur and beauty in these mountains. But be careful where you wander, especially if you crave solitude. Sometimes, old roads lead to places that are not on any map. Places that were never finished, or never meant for us. Places that warp time and reflection. If you hear whispers at night, if you see shapes in the fog, don't listen. Don't look too long. And if you manage to escape, don't go back. That's my story, believe it or don't. For my sanity, I hope you believe it. So at least I'm not alone in the knowledge that there are holes in our reality through which unspeakable things can crawl. I've checked into this little motel on the edge of Asheville, and each morning I stare in the bathroom mirror, searching my own face for some mismatch, some subtle shift that says I left part of myself behind. So far, I look like me. But sometimes, for just a split second, my reflection hesitates, and I swear it tries to speak with a voice all its own. When it happens, my heart seizes with terror, and I wonder if one day it'll say words I can't help but listen to. Then it might finally take what it wants, leaving me an empty husk, just another hollow one drifting through the fog.